The day Mara Whitfield's husband abandoned her with 4 children and $17 was the same day she learned what summer heat could do to hope. The train station shimmered in waves of prairie fire as she stood there, baby on her hip, 3 children clinging to her skirts, watching every merchant, every shopkeeper, every ranch foreman shake their heads before she even finished asking. 4 mouths were 4 too many when drought had already stolen mercy from the land. By the time she walked out of town carrying everything she owned in one battered suitcase, the sun had baked the tears right off her face. If you want to see how a woman with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn pride built a life that couldn't be taken away, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The road stretched west from the train station like a promise nobody intended to keep. Mara Whitfield put one foot in front of the other, the August heat pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Baby Samuel drowsed against her chest in the sling she'd fashioned from a shawl, his breath warm and damp against her collarbone. Behind her, 8-year-old Thomas carried the suitcase, his thin arms straining. 6-year-old Anna held 4-year-old Joseph's hand, both of them silent in that particular way children got when they understood something terrible had happened but didn't have words for it yet. The town of Bellwood, Montana Territory disappeared behind them in a haze of dust and dismissal. 7 businesses, 7 refusals. The general store owner had at least been honest. 4 children, ma'am, in a season like this? I'd be doing you a disservice to give you false hope. The boarding house proprietor hadn't even let her finish speaking. The restaurant owner had looked past her like she was already gone. Mara had held her spine straight through every single no, her voice steady as she explained she could cook, clean, mend, keep books, work dawn to midnight without complaint. She had references from Virginia, though the letters were 2 years old and the people who'd written them had probably forgotten her name by now. She had willing hands and a mind that learned fast. She had desperation dressed up in whatever dignity she could still afford. None of it mattered. Not in August of 1887, when the wheat had come in sparse and the cattle were already showing ribs. Not when water cost more than patience and every family was looking inward, protecting their own. The baby stirred, his small fist kneading against her chest. Mara shifted him gently, her arm aching from the sustained weight, but unwilling to stop moving. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant feeling the full weight of what had happened 3 days ago, when Robert had walked out the door of their rented room in Bismarck with her egg money and a woman whose name Mara had never bothered to learn. He'd left a note. 6 words. You were never what I needed. She'd burned it in the stove that same hour, using the heat to warm milk for Samuel. Practicality was the only mercy she had left. Mama? Anna's voice cut through the cicada drone. How much farther? Until we find what we're looking for, Mara answered, which was both true and completely inadequate. Thomas adjusted his grip on the suitcase, his knuckles white. What are we looking for? Work, shelter, a single person who'll see us as human beings instead of a burden. A place that needs us, Mara said instead. Somewhere we can be useful. Joseph stumbled, his legs giving out from heat and exhaustion. Anna caught him automatically, but the weight pulled them both sideways. Mara set down the canvas bag holding their cooking pot, 2 blankets, and the family Bible, then crouched beside them. You're doing so well, she told them, brushing dust from Joseph's cheek. His face was flushed, his lips dry. She pulled the canteen from her belt and gave them each a careful sip, rationing what little water remained. Just a bit farther, and then we'll rest in some shade. There isn't any shade, Thomas said flatly. He was right. The road cut through open prairie, wheat fields stretching to either horizon, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Mara stood, adjusting Samuel in the sling. Then we'll make our own. She didn't know how, but she'd figure it out. She always did. They walked another mile before she heard the truck. The sound came from behind them, an engine's rough cough, wheels grinding over packed dirt. Mara's first instinct was to move the children to the roadside, out of the way. Her second instinct, born from 3 days of survival, was to square her shoulders and prepare to be invisible again. Rich people in automobiles didn't stop for women walking with children and luggage. They especially didn't stop when those women looked like what Mara knew she must look like now, desperate, dusty, and dangerous to anyone's comfortable conscience. But the truck slowed. It was a battered Ford, maybe 10 years old, the kind ranchers used for hauling feed and fence posts. The bed held coils of wire and a toolbox. When it came to a complete stop beside them, dust rolling past in lazy waves, Mara instinctively shifted Samuel to her other hip and stepped slightly in front of her children. The driver cut the engine. The sudden silence felt louder than the motor had been. The man who climbed out moved without hurry. Tall, maybe 40, with the kind of build that came from actual work rather than leisure. Broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else. His shirt was faded blue chambray, sleeves rolled to the elbows, sweat darkening the fabric at his spine. Dust coated his boots and the cuffs of his trousers. When he removed his hat, his hair was dark brown, streaked with early gray at the temples, and his face was weathered in the way of men who worked outdoors in all seasons. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. His expression held a kind of careful neutrality that Mara couldn't quite read. "Hot day for a walk," he said. His voice was quiet, roughened by years of calling across distances. "Yes, sir, it is." Mara kept her own voice steady, professional. "We're heading west. West is a long direction. We'll know it when we see it." He studied her for a moment, his gaze taking in the children, the suitcase, the canvas bag, the way she held herself upright despite everything. Mara lifted her chin slightly. She'd been assessed plenty of times in the last 3 days. She was getting used to the weight of being measured and found wanting, but this man didn't look away the way the others had. He didn't dismiss or pity, he just looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a problem to be avoided. "Closest ranch west of here is the Morrison place," he said finally. 12 miles. "They're not hiring. I know because I asked for them last week. After that, there's nothing but open range until you hit the foothills, and that's another day's walk at least." Mara absorbed this information without flinching. 12 miles. They had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. The children couldn't make 12 miles before dark, not in this heat. And she had $17 to her name, which meant no hotel room, no restaurant meal, no cushion against catastrophe. "Thank you for the information," she said. He reset his hat on his head, tilting it against the sun. "You walked out of Bellwood?" "Yes, sir." "Asking for work?" "Yes, sir." And they all said no. It wasn't a question, but Mara answered anyway. "Yes, sir, they did." He nodded once, like this confirmed something he already knew. Then he looked at Thomas, who stood straighter under the attention, trying to look older than 8. He looked at Anna and Joseph, dust-streaked and silent. He looked at Samuel, sleeping against Mara's chest with his small fist curled against her collarbone. "What can you do?" he asked. The question hit different than all the others. There was no judgment in it, no skepticism, just genuine inquiry, like he was asking what tools she had in her kit. "I can cook for crews," Mara said. "Plain food, but plenty of it. I can clean, mend, do laundry. I kept books for a boarding house in Virginia for 3 years. I can read, write, figure numbers. I learn fast and I don't complain. I work as long as the day requires." She paused, then added the truth he'd probably already guessed. "And I need work that comes with a place to sleep, at least until I can save enough for a room in town." "4 children," he said. "Yes, sir. They're good children, quiet. They can help with small tasks, gathering eggs, weeding gardens, feeding chickens. Thomas can carry water and stack wood. Anna can mind the little ones while I work. They won't be trouble." He looked at her for a long moment. Mara held his gaze, refusing to let desperation show even though it sat like a stone in her chest. "I'm Caleb Rowe," he said. "I run a wheat and cattle operation about 8 miles northwest. It's not fancy, just me and a hired man named Douglas who comes in during harvest. I've been managing the house myself since my wife passed 2 years ago, which means it's not managed at all." He glanced at the children again. "I need someone who can cook, keep the place from falling apart, and won't mind that it's isolated. I can offer room and board plus $20 a month. There's a spare room off the kitchen that's big enough for a bed and a cot. It's not much." $20 a month, room and board, a door that locked, a roof that didn't leak. Mara felt something crack open in her chest, not hope exactly, but the space where hope might grow if she was careful. I don't need much, she said quietly. I need honest work and a safe place for my children to sleep. If you're offering that, I'm saying yes. I'm offering that. Then I accept. He nodded and moved to the truck bed, shifting the wire coils to make space. Load up. We'll get you settled before dark. Thomas lifted the suitcase into the truck bed without being asked. Mara set the canvas bag beside it, then helped Anna and Joseph climb up. She handed Samuel to Anna, who cradled him automatically, then pulled herself up after them. Caleb secured the tailgate and returned to the driver's seat. The engine coughed to life, rough but reliable. As the truck rolled forward, Mara looked back at the road they'd walked, the town barely visible now through the heat shimmer. She didn't know this man. She didn't know his ranch or what the work would truly entail. She didn't know if this was salvation or just another version of survival. But the truck was moving, the children were out of the sun, and for the first time in 3 days, someone had asked what she could do instead of listing all the reasons she couldn't. That was enough to start with. The ranch revealed itself slowly, emerging from the prairie in stages. First came the fence line, wires strung tight between weathered posts. Then the windmill, its blades turning lazy circles against the sky. Then the barn, a sturdy structure with a cupola and fresh paint on the trim, suggesting care even if resources were tight. Finally, the house itself, a simple 2-story frame building with a deep front porch and windows that still had glass in them. Caleb pulled the truck up to the side entrance and cut the engine. "Welcome to the Rowe place," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Such as it is." Mara climbed down from the truck bed and lifted Samuel back into her arms, studying the property with a practiced eye. The yard was neat but sparse. Packed dirt rather than grass, a few struggling rose bushes near the porch steps. The barn showed good maintenance. The chicken coop was well built. Everything spoke of someone who kept things functional but didn't waste energy on frills. The children tumbled out after her, stretching legs cramped from the ride. Joseph immediately moved closer to Mara, pressing against her skirt. Anna kept her hand on Thomas's shoulder. They'd learned to stay close in unfamiliar places. Caleb unloaded their suitcase and canvas bag, setting them on the porch. "Come on inside. I'll show you where you'll be staying, then we can discuss particulars." The interior of the house matched the exterior, clean but neglected in the way of places where no one had time for anything beyond necessity. The kitchen took up most of the ground floor, dominated by a cast-iron stove that looked well used but properly maintained. A large work table stood in the center, its surface scarred from years of meal preparation. Shelves lined one wall, holding dishes, jars of preserves, sacks of flour, and cornmeal. A doorway on the far side of the kitchen led to a small room, the space Caleb had mentioned. It held a bed frame with a thin mattress, a small dresser with a cracked mirror, and enough floor space for a cot or two. A single window looked out toward the barn. The wallpaper was faded, peeling at the corners, but the floor was solid and the ceiling didn't show any water stains. "It's not much," Caleb said again, standing in the doorway. "But it's dry and the door latches. I can bring down another mattress from upstairs if you need it." "This is fine," Mara said. More than fine. It was a room with a door, privacy, safety. "We're grateful." He nodded and stepped back into the kitchen. "House rules are simple. Kitchen is yours to manage as you see fit. I'll eat whatever you cook, whenever you cook it. I'm not particular. The root cellar's out back. You'll find potatoes, onions, some canned goods. There's a smokehouse with bacon and salt pork. Chickens lay pretty regular, so we've got eggs. I bring in beef when we slaughter, and there's usually some in the ice house. You can use whatever you need." Mara listened carefully, already organizing the information into meal plans and inventory lists. "What time do you usually eat?" "Sunrise and sundown, mostly. Sometimes I take lunch out to the fields if I'm working far out. Coffee whenever it's made." He paused. "I should mention, I don't expect fancy. Just food that fills the belly and doesn't take all day to prepare. You'll have enough to do keeping this place from falling apart without adding complicated cooking on top of it." "Understood." Mara shifted Samuel to her other hip. "About the children?" "They're welcome anywhere on the property except the bullpen," Caleb said. "That animal's mean enough to charge God himself. The rest is safe if they use common sense. The creek's shallow enough they won't drown. There's a rope swing in the cottonwood if they want it. Just make sure they don't leave gates open or spook the horses." Anna spoke up for the first time, her voice small but clear. Can we have a kitten? There were kittens at our last house, but we couldn't bring them. Caleb's expression softened slightly. Barns full of cats. You can make friends with any of them that'll tolerate you. Just remember they're working animals, not toys. They earn their keep catching mice. Anna's whole face brightened. Even Thomas looked interested. Now then, Caleb said, turning back to Mara. I'll let you settle in. Supper's whenever you can manage it. No rush tonight. Tomorrow we'll establish a routine. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Douglas comes in most mornings. He's a good man, keeps to himself. If you need anything lifted or fixed while I'm out in the fields, he can help. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Caleb's fine. We're not formal out here. Caleb, then. Mara set Samuel down on the bed in their new room, then returned to the kitchen. I'll have supper ready in an hour. He nodded and headed out, his boots heavy on the porch steps. As soon as he was gone, Mara let herself take a full breath. She stood in the center of the kitchen, children clustered around her, and allowed herself 30 seconds to feel the enormity of what had just happened. They had a place, a real place, with a roof and walls and a man who didn't seem inclined to hurt them or take advantage. She didn't know what kind of man Caleb Rowe truly was. Time would tell that. But he'd stopped when he could have driven past. He'd asked instead of assumed. He'd offered work when 7 other people had turned her away. That counted for something. All right, she said, squaring her shoulders. Anna, take Joseph and explore the yard. Stay where I can see you through the window. Thomas, you're with me. We're going to find what we need to make supper. They moved into action, grateful for tasks and direction. Mara started opening cupboards, taking inventory. Flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, lard. A jar of sourdough starter, still active. Dried beans, rice, a tin of baking powder. The root cellar yielded potatoes, onions, carrots, slightly soft but still usable. In the smokehouse, she found bacon and salt pork as promised. The icehouse held a quarter side of beef, well wrapped. The chicken coop provided 8 fresh eggs. She returned to the kitchen and built a fire in the stove, her hands moving through familiar motions. Thomas pumped water without being asked, filling the kettle and the large pot she'd need for boiling potatoes. Mara sliced bacon, set it to frying, started the potatoes. She mixed biscuit dough with quick efficiency, her hands remembering the rhythm from thousands of previous meals. Anna and Joseph came back inside as the kitchen filled with the smell of cooking food. They sat at the table, quiet and watchful. Samuel woke and fussed, and Mara nursed him while the bacon crisped and the biscuits rose. By the time Caleb came back inside an hour later, the table was set with plates, forks, cups. There was bacon, boiled potatoes with butter, fresh biscuits, coffee, and milk for the children. He stopped in the doorway, surveying the spread. You work fast. I've had practice. Mara gestured to the table. I hope it's acceptable. He sat down without ceremony, waited until she and the children were seated, then served himself. The first bite of biscuit made him pause. He looked at it, then at Mara. These are good. Thank you. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the small sounds of children who'd learned to be quiet at meals. Caleb finished everything on his plate, then took a second biscuit and more bacon. When the meal was done, he pushed back from the table. That was the best food I've had in this kitchen in 2 years. If the rest of your cooking is like that, I'd say we made a fair bargain. Mara felt something ease in her chest. I'll do my best to keep the standard. I believe you will. He stood, collecting his plate. Leave the washing up until morning. You've done enough today. I don't mind. Morning's fine. His tone was firm, but not unkind. You walked miles in heat that would flatten a mule. You cooked a whole meal in an unfamiliar kitchen. You've got 4 children to settle in a strange place. Whatever dishes don't get washed tonight won't spoil before dawn. Mara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right, and more than that, he was offering her permission to rest. She wasn't used to that. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded and headed for the stairs. I'll be up at first light. Coffee and breakfast whenever you're ready. After he'd gone, Mara did the dishes anyway. Not because she had to, but because she needed to. She needed to prove to herself that she could manage this, that she could hold up her end of the bargain. Thomas dried while Anna put dishes away in cupboards they were still learning. Joseph fell asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his arms. Samuel drowsed against Mara's chest in the sling, full and content. When the kitchen was clean, Mara carried Joseph to their room and tucked him into the bed beside Anna. Thomas took the floor with the blanket, insisting he didn't mind. Samuel slept in the curve of Mara's arm, his breath soft and even. Through the window, Mara could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The windmill creaked in the evening breeze. The house settled around them with small sounds of wood and foundation, the comfortable noises of a place that had stood through seasons and would stand through more. Mara closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for tonight, that they might be safe here. Morning came with birdsong and the first pale light of dawn. Mara woke before the sun crested the horizon, her body trained by years of early rising. She dressed quietly, leaving the children sleeping, and slipped into the kitchen. Caleb was already there, standing at the counter with his hands wrapped around a tin cup. He looked up when she entered. "Coffee's made," he said. "Figured I'd give you a few minutes before I started demanding breakfast." Mara poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around the warmth. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but tasted like civilization. "I'll have something ready shortly." "No rush." He leaned against the counter, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough." "Children settle okay?" "Better than expected." He nodded, apparently satisfied. They stood in companionable silence as the kitchen filled with growing light. Outside, the roosters began their chorus. The world was waking up. "I should tell you," Caleb said after a while, "what you're walking into here, so you know what you've signed on for." Mara set down her cup and gave him her full attention. "This ranch is mine free and clear," he began. "My father homesteaded it 40 years ago. I inherited when he passed, expanded the wheat acreage, built up the herd. It's not the biggest operation in the territory, but it's profitable most years. We've got 300 acres in wheat, 200 head of cattle, the chickens, 2 horses, a milk cow. It's manageable with hired help during harvest and roundup." He paused, took a drink of coffee. "My wife Margaret died 2 years ago. Fever. There wasn't anything to be done. By the time we got her to a doctor in town, it was too late." His voice stayed level, factual, but Mara heard the grief underneath. "Since then, I've been managing alone. Douglas helps with the heavy work, but he's got his own place to run. The house has gotten away from me. I can keep animals alive and crops growing, but I can't seem to keep ahead of the dust and the disorder." "I understand," Mara said quietly. "I'm telling you this so you know I'm not hiring you to replace Margaret. I'm hiring you because I need help I can't do myself, and you need work that comes with a safe place to stay. This is a business arrangement. Fair exchange of labor for wages and housing. Nothing more complicated than that." Mara met his eyes directly. "I appreciate the clarity, and I agree completely. I'm here to work, not to complicate your life." "Good." He finished his coffee and set the cup down. "Then we understand each other." "We do." "One more thing." His expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "If you or the children ever feel unsafe here, for any reason, you tell me immediately. And if I'm the problem, you take the truck and you drive straight to the sheriff in town. Keys stay on the hook by the door. That's not negotiable." Mara blinked, surprised by the directness of it. Thank you. I mean it. You're entitled to safety. So are your children. Anyone who tells you different is lying." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "All right then." He straightened, the moment of intensity passing. "I'll be out checking the irrigation until noon. Lunch whenever it's ready." He left through the side door, his stride long and purposeful. Mara stood in the quiet kitchen, processing everything he'd said. A business arrangement, fair exchange, safety as a non-negotiable condition. It was more respect than she'd encountered in a very long time. She took a breath, rolled up her sleeves, and started breakfast. The days found their rhythm quickly. Mara woke before dawn, built the fire, started coffee. She made breakfast. Biscuits, bacon, eggs, sometimes pancakes or cornmeal mush. Caleb ate without fuss, said thank you, and headed out to whatever work the day required. The children woke gradually, ate at the kitchen table, then scattered to their own pursuits. Mara worked through the house systematically, tackling one room at a time. She swept, scrubbed, mended curtains, washed windows, beat rugs. She found 2 years' worth of accumulated neglect, not filth, but the slow degradation of things left untended. She restored order piece by piece, bringing the house back to functionality. In the afternoons, she cooked beef stew thick with vegetables, chicken and dumplings, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, cornbread and beans, apple pie when she found a crate of preserves in the cellar. Plain food, but plentiful and well prepared. Caleb ate everything she made without complaint. Sometimes he'd nod in appreciation. Occasionally he'd ask for seconds. Mostly he ate in the same quiet, efficient way he did everything else. Douglas appeared most mornings, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a tendency to whistle while he worked. He tipped his hat to Mara, called the children little ones, and never stayed longer than the work required. He and Caleb communicated in half-sentences and gestures, the shorthand of men who'd worked together long enough to read each other's intentions. The children bloomed in the space and freedom. Thomas helped Douglas with small tasks, learning to mend fence and care for tools. Anna befriended every cat in the barn and started collecting eggs each morning without being asked. Joseph discovered the rope swing and spent hours flying back and forth over the creek. Samuel grew rounder, healthier, his cheeks filling out from regular meals and Mara's milk. At night, after supper was cleared and the children were in bed, Mara sat at the kitchen table and mended clothes by lamplight. Sometimes Caleb joined her, working on account books or writing letters. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. 2 weeks passed this way, then 3. The house transformed from neglected to cared for. The meals became more varied as Mara learned what they had available and what Caleb preferred. The children's laughter became a regular sound in the yard. Mara started to believe they might actually be all right here. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early September, the letter arrived. Caleb brought it in with the rest of the mail, sorted through the stack, and handed her an envelope. "This one's for you." Mara's hands went cold when she saw the return address. Bismarck. Robert's handwriting. She set it on the table without opening it. "Bad news?" Caleb asked quietly. "I don't know yet." He left her to it, heading back outside. Mara stared at the envelope for a full minute before she found the courage to open it. The letter was brief. Viciously so. "Mara, I'm informed you've abandoned your responsibilities and are living in Montana territory with a man you're not married to. This constitutes moral failure and makes you unfit to raise children in a Christian household. I'm prepared to take custody of all 4 children and raise them in a proper home with proper guidance. My lawyer will be filing the necessary paperwork. You'll be hearing from the territorial court shortly. You brought this on yourself." Robert Mara read it twice, her hand shaking. Then she folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and sat very still while her entire world cracked open beneath her. He was coming for her children. After everything, after he'd abandoned them, after he'd stolen her savings, after he'd left them with nothing, he was coming for her children, not because he wanted them. She knew Robert well enough to know that. He was doing this because he could, because somewhere in his small, bitter heart, he needed her to suffer for the crime of surviving without him. The kitchen door opened. Caleb came back inside, took one look at her face, and crossed the room. "What happened?" Mara handed him the letter without speaking. He read it standing up, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he set it down on the table with careful control. "Well," he said, "that's a problem." Mara laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "That's one word for it." "What do you want to do?" The question surprised her. Not what are you going to do or what should you do, but what do you want to do? "I want to fight," she said. "I want to keep my children, but I don't know if I can." "Why not?" "Because he's right about one thing. I don't have a legal home. I'm an employee living in my employer's house. Any judge who looks at that situation is going to see exactly what Robert's accusing me of, whether it's true or not." Her voice cracked. "I don't have money for a lawyer. I don't have standing in this community. I don't have anything except a job that could end tomorrow if you decided you didn't need me anymore." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "First of all, this job isn't ending tomorrow unless you want it to. Second, we're going to find you a lawyer. Third," he stopped, seemed to consider his words carefully. There is one way to make this whole accusation irrelevant. Mara looked at him. We could get married, he said. Legally, on paper. It would give you standing as the lady of an established household. It would make his accusations of moral failure meaningless. And it would provide you with legal protection that you don't currently have. The room seemed to tilt. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Caleb, you barely know me. I've been here 3 weeks. You can't marry someone to help them win a custody battle. I can if it makes sense for both parties involved. He leaned forward slightly. Listen to me. This isn't a romantic proposal. This is a business solution to a legal problem. We're already running a household together. We're already managing a working partnership. Making it legal just formalizes what's already happening and gives you the protection you need. But I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you already are. Someone who works hard and takes care of this place. The only thing that changes is a piece of paper that says you have every legal right to be here, raising your children, without anyone questioning your character. Mara's mind spun. What do you get out of this? A clean house, good food, and help managing a property that's too much for one person. He said it simply, like it was obvious. I'm not being charitable. I'm being practical. You need legal standing. I need long-term help. Marriage solves both problems. People will talk. Let them. I stopped caring what people thought about my choices the day Margaret died, and half the town showed up with casseroles, but nobody offered to actually help keep this place running. His voice was steady, certain. I'm not proposing love or romance. I'm proposing partnership, legal, binding partnership that protects you and gives your children a stable home. Mara pressed her hands flat against the table, trying to stop them from shaking. This is insane. Maybe. But it's also the best option you've got. She wanted to argue. She wanted to find some other solution, some way to fight this that didn't involve accepting this kind of overwhelming generosity from a man she'd known for less than a month. But he was right. This was the best option she had. Maybe the only option that stood a chance. If we did this, she said slowly, what would the terms be? Same as now. You keep the house, cook the meals, manage the domestic side. I run the ranch and the business. We split responsibilities and live our lives. The only difference is legal status and whatever that provides in terms of protection and standing. And if it doesn't work, if we can't make it function, then we figure it out like adults. But I don't see why it wouldn't work. We've already proven we can live and work together without killing each other. Adding legal status doesn't change the fundamental dynamic. Mara closed her eyes, trying to think through the fog of panic and shock. Robert was coming for her children. He would use every legal tool available to take them away, not because he wanted them, but because he wanted to hurt her. If she fought him as a single woman with no fixed address and no legal standing, she would lose. But if she fought him as the legal wife of an established rancher with a documented household and visible stability, she had a chance. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was a choice. She opened her eyes and looked at Caleb. You're sure about this? I wouldn't offer if I wasn't. And you understand what you're taking on? 4 children who aren't yours, a legal battle with my ex-husband, and all the complications that come with it? I understand. Mara took a deep breath. Then yes, I accept your proposal. He nodded once, businesslike. We'll go to town tomorrow and talk to a lawyer, get the marriage done legally, and start building a defense. If we move fast, we can have everything in place before any court date gets scheduled. All right. They sat in silence for a moment, the magnitude of what they'd just agreed to settling around them like dust after a windstorm. Finally, Caleb stood. I should get back to work. You all right? I will be, Mara said, and she meant it. She had no idea if this plan would work. She had no idea if they were making a terrible mistake. But for the first time since she'd opened that letter, she felt like she could breathe. Caleb headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're a good mother, and those children deserve to stay with you. We'll make sure that happens. Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone in the kitchen with a letter that threatened everything and a proposal that might save it all. She sat there until the children came looking for lunch, then stood up and got back to work. Because that's what she did. She kept moving, she kept fighting, she kept her children safe. And now, apparently, she was getting married to do it. They drove into Bellwood the next morning under a sky so clear it seemed scrubbed clean. Mara sat in the passenger seat wearing her one good dress, the dark blue cotton she'd saved for church services she no longer attended. The children stayed behind with Douglas, who'd arrived early with a sack of peppermints and a promise to teach Thomas how to oil a saddle. Samuel rode on Mara's lap, his small hands gripping the edge of the window frame as wind rushed past. Caleb drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel. He'd changed into a clean shirt and his better boots, though he still wore work trousers and the same weathered hat he wore every day. If he was nervous, it didn't show. He looked like a man running errands, not a man about to propose marriage to a woman he'd known for 3 weeks. Mara's stomach churned. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through everything that could go wrong. Robert could arrive before they established legal protection. The lawyer could refuse to help. The judge could side with a husband over a wife, regardless of the circumstances. 1,000 catastrophes lined up in her imagination, each one ending with her children being taken away. "Stop thinking so loud," Caleb said without looking at her. "I can hear it from here." Despite everything, Mara felt her mouth twitch. "I wasn't aware thinking had volume." "Yours does. Sounds like a thunderstorm rolling in." He glanced at her briefly. "We're going to handle this. One step at a time. No use borrowing trouble before it arrives. Trouble's already arrived. It sent a letter. Then we'll send one back with legal precedent attached." He turned onto the main road leading into town. "The lawyer we're seeing is named Martin Beck. He handled my father's estate and Margaret's will. He's fair, thorough, and doesn't suffer fools. If there's a legal strategy that works, he'll find it." The town looked different in morning light, less hostile than it had seemed when Mara walked through it on foot with 4 children and a suitcase. The storefronts gleamed, the boardwalks bustled with Wednesday commerce. People nodded to Caleb as he passed, their gazes sliding over Mara with curiosity, but not outright judgment. He parked in front of a narrow building squeezed between the general store and a barber shop. A painted sign read, "Martin Beck, attorney at law," in precise lettering. Caleb cut the engine and came around to help Mara down, taking Samuel so she could navigate the step. Inside, the office smelled like paper, ink, and old leather. A clerk sat at a desk near the door, a young man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up when they entered. "Mr. Rowe, good to see you." "Morning, Peter. Is Martin available?" "He's with a client, but they should be finishing up shortly. You can wait if you'd like." Caleb nodded and guided Mara to a pair of chairs against the wall. They sat, Samuel content to doze against Mara's shoulder. The minutes stretched. Mara listened to the muffled voices from the inner office, unable to make out words but hearing the cadence of negotiation, the rhythm of legal discussion. Finally, the door opened. A rancher Mara didn't recognize emerged, shaking hands with a man in his 50s wearing a vest and shirt sleeves. The rancher left, tipping his hat to Caleb on the way out. The lawyer, Martin Beck, turned his attention to them. "Caleb, I wasn't expecting you today." His gaze moved to Mara, assessing without being rude. "And you've brought company." "We need to talk," Caleb said, standing. "It's urgent." Martin's expression shifted to professional concern. "Come in." The inner office was lined with law books, the desk buried under organized stacks of documents. Martin gestured them to chairs and settled behind his desk, hands folded. "What's happened?" Caleb looked at Mara. She understood. This was her story to tell. She took a breath and began. 3 weeks ago, my husband abandoned me and our 4 children in Bismarck with $17 and no means of support. I came to Bellwood looking for work. Mr. Rowe hired me as his housekeeper. Yesterday, I received a letter from my husband claiming I've abandoned my responsibilities and am living immorally. He's threatening to file for custody of all 4 children. She pulled the letter from her handbag and handed it across the desk. Martin read it carefully, his face revealing nothing. When he finished, he set it down and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So she did. She told him about Robert's increasing instability, the borrowed money that never got repaid, the jobs he couldn't keep. She told him about the woman whose name she'd never learned, the note that said she was never enough, the locked door of their rented room when she returned from market with the children. She told him about walking to the train station, spending most of her remaining money on tickets to Montana Territory, because she had a cousin here once, years ago, though she'd lost track of the address. She told him about being turned away from 7 businesses before Caleb stopped his truck on a dusty road and asked what she could do. Through it all, Martin listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, he looked at Caleb. "And your involvement?" "I needed help managing my household," Caleb said simply. "Mrs. Whitfield needed work and housing. It's been a fair arrangement. She's an excellent housekeeper and cook. The children are well behaved. There's been nothing improper in our association." "I don't doubt that," Martin said. "But a judge might view the situation differently, particularly if Mr. Whitfield's lawyer frames it as a moral issue." He tapped his pen against the desk. "The problem is standing. As an employee living in your employer's house, Mrs. Whitfield has limited legal protection. A custody challenge from the legal father, even an absent one, carries significant weight." "We've discussed that," Caleb said. "Which is why we're here. We want to get married, legally, as soon as possible." Martin's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see." "It's a practical solution," Mara added quickly. "Mr. Rowe has been kind enough to offer legal protection through marriage. It would establish me as the wife of a landowner with a stable household, which should counter my husband's accusations." "Ex-husband soon," Caleb said. "That's the other thing we need. Divorce papers filed immediately." Martin studied them both for a long moment. Then he pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him. "All right, let's talk strategy. First, Mrs. Whitfield, you'll need to file for divorce on grounds of abandonment and failure to provide." The letter he sent actually helps us. It establishes that he knew where you were and made no effort to support you or the children financially. That's abandonment by any legal definition. "How long does a divorce take?" Mara asked. "In Montana Territory, minimum 6 months from filing, assuming no contest. But your husband will almost certainly contest, which could extend it to a year or more." He made another note. "However, legal separation can be established much faster, which would give you independent standing while the divorce process is. Combined with marriage to Mr. Rowe, it creates a strong legal position." "What about the custody challenge?" Caleb asked. "That's where timing matters. If we can get you married and establish Mrs. Whitfield's legal separation before any custody hearing, it significantly weakens his case. A judge will look at a mother who left an abusive situation, found stable employment, and remarried into a respectable household versus a father who abandoned his family and only sought custody after the mother established independence. The optics favor Mrs. Whitfield. Something loosened in Mara's chest. "You think we can win?" "I think you have a strong case, particularly if we move quickly and document everything properly." Martin leaned forward. "Here's what I recommend. First, we file for legal separation and divorce today. I'll draft the papers this afternoon. Second, you two get married as soon as the license can be processed. That's typically 3 days. Third, we prepare a comprehensive response to any custody filing that demonstrates the children's welfare, your stable household, and Mr. Whitfield's abandonment. Fourth, we request the hearing be held in Montana Territory rather than North Dakota, which we can argue based on the children's current residence." "Can we request that?" Mara asked. "We can request anything. Whether the court grants it depends on how we frame the argument, but Montana courts tend to favor keeping children in established homes over relocating them to uncertain situations." He looked at Caleb. "I assume you're willing to testify on Mrs. Whitfield's behalf." "Absolutely." "Good. We'll want character witnesses as well. Douglas, I assume? Anyone else in town who can speak to your household?" Caleb considered. "Reverend Thomas from the church. Doc Hayes if we need medical testimony about the children's health. Maybe Helen Crane from the general store. She's seen Mara shopping with the children, can testify they're well cared for." Martin made notes. "Excellent. The more documentation we have of normalcy and stability, the better." He looked at Mara again. "I need to ask you something difficult. Did your husband ever harm you or the children physically?" Mara's hands tightened on Samuel. "Not physically. But he was cruel in other ways. He blamed me for everything that went wrong in his life. He told Thomas he was stupid and would never amount to anything. He told Anna she cried too much and made her sleep in the pantry once as punishment for spilling milk. Her voice hardened. He never hit them, but he made sure they knew they were burdens. That's important. Emotional cruelty is harder to prove than physical abuse, but combined with abandonment, it builds a pattern of unfitness. Martin wrote steadily. Did anyone witness these incidents? The landlady in Bismarck heard him shouting. Our neighbors probably did too. The walls were thin. Names and addresses if you have them. We'll send inquiries. He finished writing and set down his pen. All right, I'll start on the divorce filing immediately. You two go to the courthouse and apply for a marriage license. Judge Porter handles those. Tell him I sent you and to expedite the process if possible. Once you have the license, you can marry as early as Saturday. Saturday. 3 days away. Mara's mind spun. Caleb stood, offering his hand. Thank you, Martin. Don't thank me yet. We've got work ahead of us. But he shook Caleb's hand firmly. I'll send word when the papers are ready to sign. And Mrs. Whitfield. He looked at her kindly. You did the right thing leaving, never doubt that. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, the day heating up. Caleb adjusted his hat and looked down the street toward the courthouse. Ready? No, Mara said honestly. But let's go anyway. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building that anchored the east end of Main Street. Inside, the air was cooler, quieter, heavy with the weight of legal proceedings and civic responsibility. A clerk directed them to the second floor where Judge Porter kept his chambers. The judge was a spare man in his 60s with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their request without expression, then pulled out the necessary forms. Name? He asked Mara. Mara Elizabeth Whitfield. Current marital status? Married, but filing for separation and divorce. His pen paused. On what grounds? Abandonment and failure to provide. He made a note and continued. Children? 4. Thomas, 8. Anna, 6. Joseph, 4. Samuel, 8 months. And you, Mr. Rowe? Caleb James Rowe. Widowed, no children. The judge worked through the rest of the form. Addresses, occupations, length of residence in the territory. When he finished, he reviewed everything carefully, then looked at them over his spectacles. This is irregular, he said. A woman still legally married, applying for a license to marry another man. The separation papers are being filed today, Caleb said. Martin Beck is handling it. Ah, Martin. The judge's expression softened slightly. Well, if Martin's involved, I assume everything's being done properly. He signed the license with a flourish. 3-day waiting period is required by law. You can marry any time after Saturday morning. Need a witness? We'll bring our own, Caleb said. Very well. Good luck to you both. He handed over the license. And Mrs. Whitfield, I hope you find the stability you're looking for. Thank you, Your Honor. Back in the truck, Mara stared at the marriage license in her hands. Official territorial seal, both their names, the date that would make it legal. 3 days from now, she would become Mara Rowe. The children would have a legal home. Robert's accusations would lose their teeth. You're thinking loud again, Caleb said as they pulled away from the courthouse. I'm thinking this is the strangest week of my life. Fair assessment. He navigated around a wagon loaded with lumber. For what it's worth, I don't think it's strange. Unconventional, maybe, but not strange. What would you call marrying someone you've known for 3 weeks to help them win a custody battle? Practical. He said it without hesitation. We've already established we work well together. The marriage just makes it official and solves a legal problem. People have married for worse reasons. Such as? Land disputes, family alliances, avoiding scandal. At least we actually like each other. He glanced at her. We do like each other, don't we? Despite everything, Mara laughed. I suppose we do. Then we're ahead of most arranged marriages in history. They drove in comfortable silence until they reached the edge of town. Then Caleb cleared his throat. I should probably mention we haven't discussed sleeping arrangements. Mara felt heat climb her neck. Oh, I'm not expecting anything, he said quickly. The marriage is for legal protection, not... what I'm trying to say is... He stopped, visibly frustrated with himself. You'll keep your room. I'll keep mine. Nothing changes except the paperwork. All right, Mara said quietly. Thank you for clarifying. I just didn't want there to be any confusion about expectations. There isn't. I understand completely. They completed the drive home without further discussion of sleeping arrangements or expectations or anything else that might make the situation more complicated than it already was. When they pulled up to the house, Douglas was on the porch with all 4 children, apparently in the middle of a story involving a bear and a butter churn. How'd it go? He called. We're getting married Saturday, Caleb said, climbing out of the truck. You're invited. Might need you to stand witness. Douglas blinked. Then his weathered face split into a grin. Well, I'll be damned. Congratulations. The children looked confused. Thomas spoke up first. Mama, you're marrying Mr. Rowe? Mara lifted Samuel from the truck and walked toward the porch. Yes. It's going to help us stay together as a family. You'll all live here permanently, and Mr. Rowe will be... She paused, uncertain what to call him. You can call me Caleb, he said to the children, or whatever feels comfortable. I'm not trying to replace your father. I'm just... He seemed to struggle for the right words. I'm just here to help. Anna looked at Mara. Will we have to leave? No, sweetheart. That's exactly what this prevents. We get to stay. Forever? Mara's throat tightened. Yes, forever. Joseph, who'd been quiet, suddenly smiled. Does this mean we can keep the kittens? The tension broke. Even Caleb laughed. Yes, you can keep the kittens. That night, after supper and dishes and the children were finally in bed, Mara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to process everything that had happened. In less than 24 hours, she'd gone from terrified mother facing custody battle to engaged woman with legal strategy and actual hope. Caleb came downstairs in his work clothes, clearly intending to check on something in the barn. He paused when he saw her. You all right? I'm not sure, Mara admitted. This all feels surreal. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Want to talk about it? I keep thinking about Saturday, about standing in front of witnesses and making promises. Even if it's just legal, it still feels significant. It is significant. That doesn't mean it's wrong. How can you be so calm about this? Caleb was quiet for a moment. When Margaret died, I spent months being angry at everything, God, fate, the fever, myself for not getting her to a doctor sooner. I was furious at the unfairness of it. And then one day Douglas told me something that stuck. He said, you can't control what happens. You can only control how you respond. He turned his cup in slow circles on the table. I can't control that your husband abandoned you. I can't control that he's trying to take your children. But I can control how I respond to a woman who needs help and happens to be exactly the help I need in return. That's not charity. That's just paying attention to what makes sense. Mara looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a young man anymore, but he wasn't old either, just weathered by work and loss into someone solid, steady, unwilling to waste energy on things he couldn't change. There was something deeply reassuring about that kind of pragmatism. You're a good man, Caleb Rowe. I'm a practical man. There's a difference. But his expression softened. You're a good woman, Mara Whitfield. Better than you give yourself credit for. Those children are lucky to have you fighting for them. I hope a judge agrees. A judge will agree because we'll make sure of it. Martin's good at his job. We'll document everything, build an airtight case, and show that those children are thriving here. Robert can make all the accusations he wants. Facts will speak louder. Mara hoped he was right. The next 3 days moved with strange duality, simultaneously crawling and racing. Mara worked through her usual tasks with mechanical precision, her mind half occupied with legal strategy and wedding logistics. Martin's clerk delivered papers to sign, dense legal documents that Mara read carefully before committing her name to them. Divorce filing, legal separation, custody response preparation. Each signature felt like building a wall brick by brick against Robert's threats. Caleb went into town Thursday and returned with a simple gold band that fit Mara's finger well enough. Belonged to my mother, he explained. Margaret wore it for a while, but it wasn't really her style. She preferred the one I bought her for our wedding. This one's been in the drawer since Ma passed. Seems right to use it. Mara turned the ring over in her palm, feeling the weight of history in it. Are you sure? Wouldn't offer if I wasn't. Friday, the children helped clean the house top to bottom, sensing something important was happening even if they didn't fully understand it. Anna picked wildflowers and arranged them in jars. Thomas swept the porch until it gleamed. Joseph polished every window within his reach. Even Samuel seemed affected by the energy, babbling more than usual and grabbing at everything with intense focus. That evening, as Mara tucked the children into bed, Anna whispered, "Are you scared, Mama?" Mara smoothed hair back from her daughter's forehead. "A little, but scared isn't always bad. Sometimes it just means something important is happening." "Do you love Mr. Rowe?" It was a child's question, direct and uncomplicating. Mara considered how to answer truthfully without confusing things further. "I respect him very much," she said carefully, "and I'm grateful for his help. Love is complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes it grows slowly, over time, through working together and building trust. This is one of those times." Anna seemed satisfied with that. She nestled into her pillow, eyes already drifting closed. "I like him. He fixed my doll's arm without me even asking." Mara kissed her forehead. "That was kind of him." In the other bed, Thomas spoke into the darkness. Robert, he never would have done something like this. He would have just told us we were on our own." The pain in his voice was old, settled deep. Mara crossed to his side and sat on the edge of his bed. "You're right," she said quietly. "He would have. But Caleb's different. He sees people who need help and he helps if he can. That's worth something." "Is he going to be our new father?" "I don't know what he's going to be, but I know he'll be honest and fair and he won't abandon us. That's more than we had before." Thomas nodded, processing this. Then, in a smaller voice, "I'm glad we're staying here. I like the barn cats. And Douglas is teaching me to rope." "I'm glad too, sweetheart." She sat with them until they all fell asleep, watching their faces relax into peace. Whatever else happened, she'd done this much right. She'd kept them safe, kept them fed, kept them together. And tomorrow, she'd make that security permanent. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Mara woke early, dressed in her blue cotton dress, and braided her hair into a simple coronet. She had no veil, no white dress, no flowers beyond what Anna had picked. This wasn't that kind of wedding, but she pinned the wildflowers into her hair anyway, a small gesture toward tradition. The children dressed in their Sunday clothes, worn but clean. Douglas arrived at 9 with his wife Ruth, a capable woman with kind eyes, who brought fresh bread and a knowing smile. Reverend Thomas came at 9:30, prayer book under his arm, and questions tactfully unasked. They gathered in the front parlor, the room Mara had spent days cleaning and which now gleamed with polish and care. Caleb stood by the window in his best shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing, his expression calm but serious. When Mara entered with Samuel on her hip and the other children clustered around her, Caleb's eyes met hers across the room. Something passed between them, not love, not yet, but understanding, recognition of what they were doing and why it mattered. Reverend Thomas opened his prayer book. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Mara, familiar from a wedding years ago that had started with hope and ended in abandonment. But this was different. This wasn't about romance or passion or promises of forever devotion. This was about partnership, practicality, and two people choosing to face problems together rather than alone. "Do you, Caleb James Rowe, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Caleb said clearly. "And do you, Mara Elizabeth Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" Mara looked at Caleb, at this man who'd stopped on a dusty road and asked what she could do instead of listing what she couldn't. Who'd offered work when everyone else offered rejection? Who'd proposed marriage not because he loved her, but because it was the right solution to an impossible problem? "I do," she said. Caleb slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the gold warm against her skin. By the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Caleb leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Mara's forehead, brief and respectful. The children clapped. Ruth wiped her eyes. Douglas grinned broadly. And just like that, Mara Whitfield became Mara Rowe. They signed the certificate with Douglas and Ruth as witnesses. Reverend Thomas offered congratulations and prayers for their union. Ruth insisted everyone eat the bread she'd brought, served with butter and jam. The children devoured it, still treating the day like a celebration, even if the adults approached it with more complicated feelings. After everyone left, the house settled into strange quiet. Caleb went out to check on the cattle. The children scattered to their usual pursuits. Mara stood in the kitchen, gold band heavy on her finger, and tried to understand what had just happened. She was married, again, to a man she'd known for less than a month, a man who'd married her to help her keep her children. It was the most impractical, practical arrangement she could imagine. That evening, as she prepared supper, Caleb came inside and washed up at the pump. He caught her looking at the ring on her finger and paused. "Having regrets?" "No," Mara said honestly. "Just trying to adjust to the reality." "That's fair." He dried his hands on the towel. "For what it's worth, I meant what I said in those vows. This might have started as legal strategy, but I don't take marriage lightly. I'll hold up my end of this partnership." "I know you will." Mara turned back to the stove. "I will too." They ate supper as they always had, family style, passing dishes, children chattering about their day. The only difference was the ring on Mara's finger and the legal document locked in Caleb's desk that said they belonged to each other in the eyes of the law. It wasn't romance, it wasn't passion, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was the foundation they'd build everything else on. After the children were asleep, Mara found Caleb on the porch, looking out over the darkened fields. She joined him, wrapping her shawl against the September chill. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For this. For all of it. For seeing us as people worth helping instead of problems to avoid." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "My father used to say the measure of a man isn't what he does when it's easy. It's what he does when it costs him something." He looked at her. "This doesn't cost me anything, Mara. I get a clean house, good food, and company that's better than my own. You're the one taking the risk here." "How do you figure?" "You're trusting a stranger with your children's safety. You're betting your future on a man you've known 3 weeks. That takes more courage than anything I'm doing." Mara considered this. "Maybe we're both taking risks, just different kinds." "Maybe." He smiled slightly. "Guess we'll find out together." They stood in comfortable silence as night deepened around them, stars emerging one by one in the vast Montana sky. Somewhere in North Dakota, Robert was probably drafting legal threats and imagining he'd already won. He didn't know about the marriage. He didn't know about Martin Beck. He didn't know that Mara had found something he'd never given her, a true partner who saw her as an equal rather than a burden. Let him send his threats. Let him file his papers. Let him try to take her children through legal manipulation and cruel accusations. She had a ranch, a home, a husband who respected her, and a lawyer who knew how to fight. Robert didn't stand a chance. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after the wedding, delivered by a circuit rider who looked apologetic as he handed it over. Mara recognized the official territorial seal before she even opened it. Her hand steadied as she broke the wax. She'd been expecting this, had prepared for it, but the reality of seeing the words still hit like a fist to the stomach. Territory of North Dakota, District Court. In the matter of custody of minor children Thomas, Anna, Joseph, and Samuel Whitfield. Petitioner Robert Whitfield requests immediate transfer of custody based on maternal abandonment and moral unfitness. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th in Bismarck, 3 weeks away. Caleb came in from the barn as she was reading it for the 3rd time, her eyes tracking over the legal language that tried to reduce her children to case numbers and her motherhood to a list of alleged failures. He didn't ask what it said. He could read it on her face. "I'll hitch the wagon," he said. "We're going to see Martin." They made the trip to town in tense silence, Mara clutching the summons like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. The September morning was crisp, the first real hint of autumn in the air, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already in that courtroom, watching a judge decide whether her children belonged with her or with a man who'd walked away from them without a backward glance. Martin read the summons with his usual careful attention, then set it down and folded his hands on the desk. "This is actually good news." Mara stared at him. "How is any of this good news?" "Because he filed in North Dakota, which gives us grounds to petition for venue change to Montana. The children have been residing here for over a month. They're enrolled in the local school." He looked at Caleb. "They are enrolled, aren't they?" "As of Monday," Caleb confirmed. "All three of the older ones. Teacher says they're doing well." "Excellent. That establishes residency and stability. We can argue that moving the case to Montana serves the children's best interest by not disrupting their education and established routine." Martin pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "More importantly, we now have documentation of your marriage to Mr. Rowe, which directly contradicts the moral unfitness claim. You're the legal wife of a respected landowner. Your household is stable, your children are thriving, and you have community ties. This isn't the situation of a desperate woman living inappropriately. This is a mother who remarried and established a proper home." "Will the North Dakota court accept the venue change?" Mara asked. "They might not, but even if they don't, we'll have established a paper trail showing that you acted in good faith, that the children's welfare is your priority, and that Mr. Whitfield's claims are baseless." Martin began writing. "I'm going to draft a comprehensive response. We'll include affidavits from Caleb, Douglas, the school teacher, Reverend Thomas, and Doc Hayes. We'll document the children's health, their educational progress, and the stability of your household. We'll also include the timeline of Mr. Whitfield's abandonment, how long he waited before expressing any interest in the children, the fact that he's made no financial contributions, his failure to maintain contact." "He could argue he didn't know where we were," Mara said, "except he clearly did know, given that he sent you that threatening letter. Can't have it both ways. Either he knew your location and chose not to provide support, or he didn't know and therefore couldn't have been attempting to maintain a relationship with his children." Martin's pen moved steadily. "Either argument works in our favor." Caleb leaned forward. "What are the odds the hearing stays in North Dakota?" 50-50. Judge there might see it as his jurisdiction since the marriage occurred there, and Mr. Whitfield filed first. But if we can get it moved to Montana, our odds improve significantly. Judge Porter knows you, knows your standing in the community. He's also got a reputation for ruling in favor of children's established welfare over parental rights when those rights have been previously abandoned. And if it stays in North Dakota? Mara's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. Then we make the trip to Bismarck and we fight like hell. We bring every piece of evidence we have. We demonstrate that you left because you had no choice, that you've built a stable life for those children, and that returning them to Mr. Whitfield would cause measurable harm. Martin met her eyes. "I won't lie to you. It's harder to win in his territory. But it's not impossible. Judges care about facts, and the facts are on your side." They left Martin's office with a plan and a timeline. He'd file the venue change petition immediately, prepare affidavits for witnesses to sign, and compile documentation of the children's current situation. If the hearing stayed in North Dakota, he'd travel there with them. If it moved to Montana, they'd have home court advantage. Either way, they were fighting. On the drive back, Caleb said, "We should tell the children." Mara's stomach clenched. "Tell them what exactly? That their father who abandoned them is now trying to take them away from the only stability they've known in months? Tell them the truth in a way they can understand. That there's a legal matter being resolved, that adults are handling it, and that no matter what happens, we're going to keep them safe." He guided the wagon around a rut in the road. "They're already anxious. I've seen Thomas watching you when he thinks you don't notice. Anna's been having nightmares again. They know something's wrong. Better to give them facts they can hold on to than let their imaginations fill in the gaps." He was right. Mara hated it, but he was right. That evening after supper, they gathered everyone in the parlor. The children sat close together on the sofa, sensing the seriousness of the moment. Samuel played on a blanket at Mara's feet, oblivious to the tension. Mara took a breath and began. "You all know that your father and I aren't together anymore. What you might not know is that there are legal steps that have to happen when a marriage ends, papers that need to be filed, a judge who has to approve everything." Thomas's jaw tightened. "He's trying to take us back." He's filed a legal petition, yes, but that doesn't mean he'll succeed. Mara kept her voice calm, factual. We have a lawyer named Mr. Beck who's helping us. We have evidence that shows you're healthy, safe, and doing well here. We have witnesses who can testify that this is a good home. What if the judge says we have to go? Anna's voice was very small. Caleb spoke up before Mara could answer. Then we appeal the decision and keep fighting. But I don't think it'll come to that. Judges care about what's best for children, and what's best for you four is staying right here where you've got school, friends, a stable home, and people who care about you. Does Robert even want us? Thomas asked bitterly. Or is he just doing this to hurt Mama? It was the question Mara had been avoiding asking herself. She chose her words carefully. I don't know what's in his heart, but I know what's in mine. I want you with me. I've built this life so we could stay together, and I'm going to fight with everything I have to make sure that happens. Joseph, who'd been silent, scooted closer to Mara and pressed against her side. I don't want to leave. I like it here. Douglas is teaching me to whistle. And you're getting very good at it, Mara said, wrapping her arm around him. We're doing everything we can to make sure you don't have to leave. What do we need to do? Thomas asked. He was trying so hard to be brave, to be the man of the family even though he was only 8. You need to keep being exactly who you are, Caleb said. Go to school, do your work, help around the ranch. If anyone asks you questions about living here, you answer honestly. Don't exaggerate, don't make things up, just tell the truth. Can you do that? All 3 of the older children nodded. Good. Then we'll handle the rest. Caleb stood, signaling the conversation was over. Now, who wants to help me check on the new calf in the barn? The children scrambled up, grateful for the return to normalcy. As they filed out, Anna paused and looked back at Mara. We're really going to be okay? Mara pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Yes, sweetheart, we really are. She hoped with everything in her that she wasn't lying. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Martin's clerk came to the ranch 3 times, collecting signatures on affidavits and depositions. Doc Hayes arrived one afternoon, examined all 4 children, and wrote a detailed report on their excellent health and proper development. The school teacher, Miss Caroline Wright, sent a letter praising Thomas's progress in arithmetic, Anna's beautiful penmanship, and Joseph's enthusiasm for learning. Reverend Thomas provided a character reference. Douglas and Ruth signed statements about the household's stability and Mara's capabilities as a mother. Each piece of documentation felt like armor, like building a wall between her children and Robert's threats, 1 brick at a time. Caleb worked longer hours than usual, getting the harvest finished before they'd potentially need to travel to North Dakota. He came in each evening exhausted and dusty, but he always asked about the legal preparations, always reviewed whatever new documents Martin had sent, always offered quiet reassurance when Mara's anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. They'd fallen into a rhythm as a married couple that felt both strange and comfortable. They didn't share a bed, didn't share intimacy beyond the occasional touch on the shoulder or hand on the arm, but they shared everything else. Meals, conversation, worry about the children, plans for the ranch. They'd become partners in the truest sense, building something together, even if that something wasn't romance. One night, unable to sleep, Mara came downstairs to find Caleb at the kitchen table with the account books and a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. You should be sleeping, she said. So should you. He set down his pen. Couldn't turn your mind off either? No. She poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove, not caring that it was nearly midnight. I keep thinking about October 15th, about standing in a courtroom while a stranger decides my children's fate. You won't be standing alone. I'll be there. Martin will be there. We'll have a stack of evidence showing that those children belong with you. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. I know it doesn't make the waiting easier, but try to remember, you're not the same woman who walked away from that train station. You've got resources now, legal standing, a home that's documented and verified. That counts for something. What if it doesn't count for enough? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, When Margaret got sick, I spent 3 days refusing to believe she could die. I kept thinking if I just tried hard enough, if I just didn't give up, I could will her back to health. But she died anyway, and I learned that some things are beyond our control no matter how hard we fight. Mara's throat tightened. But this isn't one of those things, he continued. This isn't fate or illness or something we're powerless against. This is a legal battle, and legal battles are won with preparation, evidence, and persistence. We've got all three. So no, I can't promise you'll win, but I can promise you've got the best possible chance and that we'll fight until there's nothing left to fight with. Why are you doing this? The question escaped before Mara could stop it. Really doing this? You could have just given me a job and stayed out of the rest. You didn't have to marry me, didn't have to involve yourself in my legal troubles, didn't have to risk your reputation standing beside a woman facing custody battle with her ex-husband. So why? Caleb looked at her steadily. Because when I stopped on that road and you told me you could cook, clean, work without complaint, and carry children while splitting wood, I saw someone who'd been beaten down by circumstances but refused to quit. I saw strength that didn't know how to recognize itself as strength. And I thought, he paused, I thought the world had already been unfair enough to you. Maybe I could balance the scales a little. That's not just practicality talking. No, he admitted, it's not. But it doesn't have to be romance either. It can just be recognition. One person seeing another person's worth when the world seems determined not to. Mara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee and everything to do with being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Thank you, she said quietly. You've thanked me enough times. Maybe now you just believe me. The hearing venue petition was denied on October 8th. The letter from the North Dakota court was brief and to the point. The children were born in North Dakota, the marriage occurred in North Dakota, and the petitioning father resided in North Dakota. Therefore, North Dakota had jurisdiction regardless of current residency. Damn, Martin said when they met in his office that afternoon. I was hoping Porter's reputation would carry some weight, but the North Dakota judge is a stickler for jurisdictional protocol. So we go to Bismarck, Caleb said. We go to Bismarck, Martin confirmed. The hearing is October 15th at 10 in the morning. That means we need to leave October 13th to account for travel time. I'll arrange hotel rooms. We'll bring all our documentation. And Mara, he looked at her seriously. You'll need to testify. Are you prepared for that? What will they ask me? About why you left. About your current living situation. About the children's welfare. Robert's lawyer will try to make you look irresponsible or morally questionable. You'll need to stay calm, answer honestly, and don't let them provoke you into anger or defensiveness. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. I can do that. I know you can, but it won't be pleasant. He'll likely bring up the speed of your remarriage, the fact that you're living in another territory, possibly even question your fitness based on having 4 young children. Let him question, Mara said, her voice hardening. I left because I had no choice. I remarried because it was the smart thing to do. And I'm a good mother because I put my children's needs ahead of my pride. If he wants to twist that into something shameful that says more about him than it does about me, Martin smiled slightly. That's exactly the energy you'll need. Hold on to it. They left October 13th on the early train, the 5 of them, Mara, Caleb, Martin, and surprisingly Douglas, who'd insisted on coming to watch the children during the hearing. Can't have those little ones sitting in a courtroom listening to lawyers tear apart their mama, he'd said gruffly. I'll take them to the park, buy them peppermints, keep them distracted. Ruth had packed enough food for a week, pressed a small tin of coins into Douglas's hand for emergencies, and hugged Mara hard enough to crack ribs. You bring those babies home, she'd whispered fiercely. You hear me? You bring them home. The train ride was long and tense. The children sensed the gravity of the situation despite Douglas's best efforts to keep them entertained. Thomas stared out the window with unusual silence. Anna clutched her doll and barely spoke. Joseph fell asleep against Mara's shoulder, his small face troubled even in rest. Samuel fussed more than usual, picking up on the ambient anxiety. They arrived in Bismarck as evening fell, the city Mara had fled from now looming like a judgment she couldn't escape. Martin had secured rooms at a respectable hotel near the courthouse. The children were fed and settled, Douglas taking the room next to theirs with firm instructions that he'd handle any nighttime disturbances. Mara barely slept. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, Caleb in a chair by the window, claiming he was more comfortable there, and watched shadows move across the ceiling. Somewhere in this city, Robert was preparing his own case. Somewhere, a lawyer was crafting arguments designed to paint Mara as unfit, irresponsible, a woman who'd abandoned her duties in favor of selfish escape. The The truth didn't seem nearly as compelling as the lie. Morning came too quickly. Mara dressed in her best clothes, the dark blue cotton dress, freshly pressed, her hair pinned neatly. She looked respectable, maternal, stable. Everything a judge needed to see. Caleb wore his Sunday suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes but determined. Martin arrived at their door at 8:30, leather case full of documents, his expression focused and ready. "Remember," he said as they walked toward the courthouse, "answer questions directly. Don't volunteer extra information. If you don't know something, say you don't know. And Mara, no matter what Robert's lawyer says, don't let them see you rattled. Judges watch for composure. Show them you're exactly what you are, a strong woman who made difficult choices to protect her children." The courthouse was an imposing stone building that smelled like old wood and older power. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as they made their way to the courtroom. Outside the doors, Martin stopped them. "Douglas has the children?" "At the hotel," Caleb confirmed. "He'll keep them there until we send word." "Good. Let's do this." The courtroom was smaller than Mara had imagined, with wooden benches and a judge's bench that seemed designed to intimidate. Robert was already there, sitting with a thin man in an expensive suit who had the look of a lawyer who enjoyed crushing opponents. When Robert saw Mara, something cold and satisfied flickered across his face. He looked the same: sandy hair, weak chin, eyes that had always been more calculating than kind. But now there was something else too, a smugness that made Mara's jaw clench. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezed once, a reminder that she wasn't alone. They took their seats. Martin arranged his documents with methodical precision. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge William Bradford entered, a man in his late 50s with iron-gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away. He settled behind the bench, reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. "This is a custody hearing in the matter of Whitfield versus Whitfield. Mr. Harrison, you're representing the petitioner?" The thin lawyer stood. "Yes, Your Honor. James Harrison representing Mr. Robert Whitfield." "And for the respondent?" "Martin Beck, Your Honor, representing Mrs. Mara Rowe, formerly Whitfield." The judge's eyebrow rose slightly at the name change, but he made no comment. "Very well. Mr. Harrison, present your case." What followed was 2 hours of careful dismantling of Mara's character. Harrison was skilled. She had to give him that. He painted a picture of a woman who'd abandoned her marriage at the first sign of difficulty, who'd fled across territorial lines to avoid responsibility, who'd remarried with suspicious speed to a man she barely knew, all while dragging 4 innocent children through instability and questionable moral situations. He called it abandonment of duty. He called it selfish. He called it evidence of unsuitability for motherhood. And through it all, Robert sat there looking like a concerned father wronged by a wayward wife. When Harrison finished, Martin stood. "Your Honor, if I may present a rather different version of events." What Martin did next was nothing short of surgical. He walked through the timeline, establishing Robert's pattern of job loss, financial irresponsibility, and escalating verbal cruelty. He presented the letter Robert had left, 6 words that demonstrated clear intent to abandon. He documented the 3-day period during which Mara had no money, no home, and 4 children to feed. He showed the train ticket receipts, the records of Mara's job inquiries in Bellwood, Caleb's hiring documentation, the marriage certificate, the children's school enrollment records, Doc Hayes's health evaluations, character references from Reverend Thomas, the schoolteacher, Douglas and Ruth, even the general store owner who'd noticed how well-behaved the children were. He built a picture not of abandonment, but of survival, not of moral failure, but of moral courage. Mrs. Rowe didn't abandon her marriage, Martin said clearly. She escaped it when it became untenable. She didn't flee responsibility. She shouldered it completely when Mr. Whitfield walked away. And she didn't remarry out of selfishness. She remarried to provide her children with stability, security, and a father figure who actually wanted to be present in their lives. Harrison objected twice. The judge sustained neither objection. Finally, Judge Bradford looked at Mara. "Mrs. Rowe, I'd like to hear from you directly. Please take the stand." Mara's legs felt unsteady as she crossed to the witness box. The bailiff swore her in. She sat, hands folded in her lap, and met the judge's eyes. Mrs. Rowe, why did you leave your husband? She took a breath. Because staying was no longer safe for me or my children. Not physically, he never hit us. But emotionally, he'd become cruel. He blamed us for everything that went wrong in his life. He told our son he was worthless. He punished our daughter for childish mistakes. And when he decided he was done trying to make our marriage work, he simply left. No warning, no discussion, no provision for our welfare. Just a note saying I was never what he needed. And you chose to come to Montana Territory. Why? I had a cousin here once, years ago. I thought perhaps I could find her, or find work, or find something other than destitution. I had $17 and 4 children. Montana seemed like the only option that didn't involve charity or surrender. Tell me about meeting Mr. Rowe. So she did. She told him about walking miles in summer heat, about being turned away from every business, about Caleb stopping his truck and asking what she could do instead of listing why she couldn't. She told him about the work she'd done, the home she'd helped maintain, the partnership they'd built. And the marriage? Judge Bradford asked. Mr. Harrison suggests it was precipitous. It was practical, Mara said firmly. Mr. Rowe needed long-term household help. I needed legal standing and security for my children. We married to formalize a working relationship that was already functioning well. Was it fast by conventional standards? Yes. But nothing about my situation was conventional. I made the choice that gave my children the best chance at stability. Do you love Mr. Rowe? The question caught her off guard. Mara glanced at Caleb, who sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. I respect him deeply, she said carefully. I trust him. I rely on him. Whether that's love or will become love, I can't say. But I can say he's been more of a father to my children in 2 months than their biological father was in 8 years. He fixes broken toys without being asked. He teaches my son to work with tools and treats him like his opinions matter. He built my daughter a shelf for her drawings. He holds the baby when I'm busy and never complains. That's worth more than romantic declarations. Judge Bradford made a note. Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. You may step down. Harrison stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. Whitfield to testify. Robert took the stand, looking appropriately concerned and paternal. Under Harrison's questioning, he claimed he'd been desperately searching for Mara and the children, that he'd been willing to work things out, that her disappearance had devastated him. It was a masterful performance. If Mara hadn't lived through the truth, she might have believed it. Then Martin stood for cross-examination. Mr. Whitfield, you said you were searching desperately for your wife and children, yet you waited 6 weeks before filing this custody petition. Why the delay? Robert hesitated. I was trying to locate them first, but according to the letter you sent Mrs. Rowe in early September, you knew exactly where she was. In fact, you threatened her with custody action in that very letter, so you knew her location but waited another 3 weeks to file. Again, why? I was hoping she'd come to her senses and return. I see. And during this time, did you send any money to support your children? I didn't know where to send it. But you knew she was in Montana Territory. You could have sent funds to her through the territorial court system, through a bank transfer, through any number of legal channels. Did you attempt any of those? No, but did you write letters to the children asking how they were? No. Did you make any attempt to visit them? It's a long distance. It's the same distance they traveled when Mrs. Rowe brought them here with $17 and determination. Yet you, an able-bodied man with no children to carry, couldn't manage the trip to see your own offspring? Martin's voice stayed level, but the implication was devastating. How many jobs have you held in the past 2 years, Mr. Whitfield? I don't see how that's relevant. Please answer the question. Robert's jaw tightened. 5, maybe 6. And the longest you held any one position? 3 months. During your marriage, who was the primary financial provider for the household? We both contributed. Mrs. Rowe worked as a seamstress and took in laundry to supplement your inconsistent income. Did she not? Sometimes, but yes or no, Mr. Whitfield? Yes. Martin pulled out a document. This is a statement from your previous landlady in Bismarck. She states that you left owing 2 months' rent, that you were frequently heard shouting at your wife and children, and that on the day you left, you were seen with another woman. Is this accurate? Robert's face flushed. My relationship with my landlady is not... Is it accurate? I may have owed rent, but that doesn't mean... Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. No further questions. The damage was done. Robert stepped down looking significantly less sympathetic than when he'd taken the stand. Judge Bradford called a brief recess. Mara stood on shaking legs, Caleb's hand immediately steadying her elbow. They stepped outside where Douglas was waiting with the children. How's it going? He asked quietly. We're holding our own, Martin said. The judge is listening. That's all we can ask. When they returned, Judge Bradford was already back at his bench. He waited until everyone was seated, then spoke. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. I've listened to testimony from both Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. And I've considered the welfare of the 4 minor children at the center of this dispute. He paused, his expression thoughtful. This court recognizes that Mrs. Rowe, formerly Mrs. Whitfield, left her marriage under difficult circumstances. The evidence suggests Mr. Whitfield had indeed abandoned his family prior to Mrs. Rowe's departure. His subsequent failure to provide financial support or maintain contact with his children undermines his claim of parental concern. Mara's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear over it. However, the judge continued, this court is also concerned about the speed of Mrs. Rowe's remarriage and the potential disruption to the children's lives caused by multiple moves across territorial lines in a short period. Mara's breath caught. Therefore, I'm ordering a 60-day continuance. During this time, I'm appointing a guardian ad litem to visit the Rowe household in Montana Territory and assess the children's living conditions, educational progress, and general welfare. The guardian will interview the children, observe their daily routine, and report back to this court. Based on that report, I will make a final determination regarding custody. He looked at both parties. In the meantime, temporary custody remains with Mrs. Rowe. Mr. Whitfield, you are granted supervised visitation rights should you choose to exercise them, to be arranged through the territorial court. This hearing is adjourned until December 20th. The gavel came down. Mara sat perfectly still, trying to process what had just happened. Not a win, but not a loss either. 60 more days. A guardian coming to evaluate their home. 60 days to prove she was enough. Martin was already gathering documents. This is good, he said quietly. It's not what we wanted, but it's manageable. We'll prepare for the guardian's visit, document everything, and present the strongest possible case. Caleb's hand found Mara's again. We've got 60 days. We'll use them well. Outside, the children rushed to meet them, Douglas trailing behind. Thomas searched Mara's face, reading the truth there. We can go home? He asked. Mara pulled him close, gathered all 4 children against her. Yes, sweetheart, we can go home. And they did, carrying with them 60 days of borrowed time and the weight of a battle not yet won. The train carried them back through autumn landscape turning gold and crimson, but Mara barely saw it. She kept replaying the judge's words in her mind, parsing every syllable for hidden meaning. 60 days. A guardian ad litem. Temporary custody that could become permanent or evaporate entirely based on one person's assessment of whether she was mother enough. Thomas sat beside her, his small hand wrapped around hers. He hadn't let go since they'd left the courthouse, as if physical contact could anchor them both against the uncertainty. Anna dozed against Caleb's shoulder, exhausted from the tension of waiting. Joseph played quietly with a wooden horse Douglas had carved for him during the hearing. Samuel nursed and slept, oblivious to the fact that his entire future had just been placed in limbo. Stop, Caleb said quietly, not looking at her, but somehow knowing exactly where her thoughts had gone. I can hear you spiraling from here. A stranger is going to come into our home and decide if I'm fit to keep my children, Mara said, keeping her voice low so the children wouldn't hear the tremor in it. How am I supposed to not spiral? By remembering that you've already built exactly what they'll be looking for. A stable home, healthy children, proper routine. The guardian's job isn't to find fault, it's to verify what we've already established. He shifted slightly so Anna could rest more comfortably. We've got 2 months to prepare. We'll use them. Douglas, sitting across from them, spoke up. The judge could have ruled for Robert right there in the courtroom. He didn't. That tells you something. It tells me he's undecided, Mara said. It tells you he's careful, Douglas corrected. which is what you want in a judge making decisions about children. He's not swayed by a father's crocodile tears or fancy lawyer tricks. He wants facts, so we'll give him facts. Martin, reviewing his notes in the seat ahead, turned around. Douglas is right. Judge Bradford has a reputation for thorough investigation before major rulings. The guardian ad litem appointment is actually standard practice in contested custody cases, especially when there are allegations of abandonment or unfitness on both sides. This isn't a sign of doubt. It's a sign of due diligence. Who will they send? Mara asked. Usually it's someone with social welfare experience. Could be a former teacher, a church official, sometimes a lawyer who specializes in family law. They'll give us advance notice of the visit, typically 3 to 5 days. The evaluation will take at least a full day, possibly 2. They'll want to see the children's living quarters, observe family meals, talk to the children privately, interview both you and Caleb, likely speak with neighbors and community members. Mara's stomach clenched. They'll interview the children alone? Yes. It's standard. They need to ensure the children aren't being coached or pressured to give certain answers. Martin's voice gentled. I know it's frightening, but your children are honest, well-adjusted, and clearly thriving. They'll tell the truth, and the truth favors you. What if Thomas mentions that Robert used to shout? Mara worried. What if Anna talks about being scared sometimes? What if they make our old life sound worse than it was, and the guardian thinks I'm coaching them to paint Robert negatively? Then the guardian will cross-reference their statements with the documented evidence. The landlady's testimony, Robert's own admissions on the stand, the timeline of his abandonment, Martin said. Children's statements don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of a larger picture, and that picture overwhelmingly supports your fitness as a mother. The train rumbled on through the afternoon. Mara tried to take comfort in their words, tried to believe that 2 months would be enough time to prove what should have been self-evident from the start. That she loved her children, that she'd built them a good life, that taking them away would be cruelty masquerading as justice. But fear was a stubborn thing, and it settled into her bones like winter cold. They arrived back at the ranch just after sunset, the familiar outline of the house and barn emerging from the twilight like a promise. Ruth was waiting on the porch, and she gathered Mara into a fierce hug before anyone could even climb down from the wagon Douglas had brought to meet them at the station. Tell me, she demanded. 60-day continuance, Caleb said, helping the children down. Guardian ad litem, coming to evaluate the household. Temporary custody stays with Mara until final hearing in December. Ruth's face showed relief and concern in equal measure. Well then, 60 days is 60 days. We'll make them count. She shooed the children toward the house. I've got stew waiting and fresh bread. You all look half-starved. Over dinner, surrounded by the familiar comfort of their own kitchen, some of the tension finally began to ease. The children ate with better appetite than they'd shown in days. Douglas and Ruth kept conversation flowing with ranch news and town gossip, carefully avoiding any mention of courts or custody or guardians. After the children were in bed, the adults gathered at the kitchen table with coffee that was more ritual than refreshment at this late hour. Martin had accepted Ruth's invitation to stay the night, rather than make the trip back to town in darkness. All right, Ruth said, pulling out a piece of paper and a pencil. Let's make a plan. What does this guardian need to see? Stability, Martin said. Routine. Evidence of proper care. Adequate food. Clean living conditions. Educational support. Emotional nurturing. They'll want to see that the children have their own space, appropriate clothing, access to medical care when needed. They already have all that, Mara said. Then we document it, Ruth replied, already writing. We make lists. We prepare records. We show that this isn't some thrown-together situation. This is a well-managed household with thought and care put into every detail. The children's school records will help, Caleb added. Miss Wright says they're all performing at or above level for their ages. Thomas is excelling at mathematics, Anna's reading is exceptional, and Joseph's already learning his letters, even though he's only 4. Medical records from Doc Hayes, Douglas contributed. He's seen them for the normal childhood things, bumps and sniffles. He can testify they're healthy, well-nourished, properly cared for. Martin made notes. We should also document the children's daily routine, what time they wake, what they eat, their chores and responsibilities, their free time activities, bedtime. The guardian will want to see structure without rigidity, Routine that supports development without stifling childhood. What about character witnesses? Ruth asked. We've already got statements from the Reverend, the teacher, Doc Hayes, and you two, Martin said. But additional voices wouldn't hurt. Anyone in town who's interacted with the family and can speak to their well-being. Helen Crane at the general store, Caleb suggested. She's known Mara since the first week, has seen her shopping for the children, managing the household budget. She commented to me just last week how well-mannered the children are. The blacksmith, Douglas added. Thomas has been watching him work sometimes after school. He could speak to the boys' curiosity and good behavior. Mara listened to them building her defense, these people who'd become her community in just a few short months. 2 months ago, she'd been a stranger walking a dusty road with nothing but a suitcase and desperation. Now she had people fighting for her, planning with her, investing their time and reputation in her family's welfare. The gratitude threatened to overwhelm her. Thank you, she managed. All of you. I don't know how to... You don't need to thank us, Ruth interrupted firmly. This is what people do. We take care of our own, and you're ours now. Those children are ours, so we make sure they stay where they belong. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of careful preparation layered over normal life. Mara maintained the household routine she'd established. Early rising, breakfast for Caleb before he headed out to the fields, children off to school with clean clothes and full lunch pails, the never-ending cycle of cooking, cleaning, mending, managing. But now she also documented everything. She kept a ledger of meals served, noting nutritional variety and adequate portions. She recorded the children's homework assignments and their progress. She made note of bedtimes, bath times, Sunday church attendance, weekly visits to the library. Every aspect of their daily life became evidence, proof of capability and care. The children adapted to the heightened awareness with surprising resilience. When Mara explained that someone would be coming to make sure they were happy and healthy, Thomas had simply nodded and said, "We are happy and healthy, so they'll see that." Anna wanted to clean her side of the room and organize her drawings to show the visitor. Joseph asked if he could demonstrate his whistling skills that Douglas had taught him. Their innocence broke her heart and strengthened her resolve in equal measure. 3 weeks after their return from Bismarck, the letter arrived. Official territorial seal, formal language, the guardian ad litem's name and credentials. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, former teacher and current child welfare advocate, would be visiting the Rowe household on November 8th and 9th for comprehensive evaluation. She would be arriving on the afternoon train and staying at the hotel in town, conducting her assessment over 2 full days. November 8th, 2 weeks away. 14 days, Caleb said that evening, reading over Mara's shoulder. Plenty of time. Time for what? We can't change who we are in 14 days. Either we're good enough as we stand or we're not. We're good enough as we stand, Caleb said firmly. But we can make sure everything she needs to see is visible and organized. Fresh coat of whitewash on the chicken coop. Fix that loose board on the porch steps. Make sure the children's room is tidy but lived in. We want her to see they actually live here, not that we're staging for inspection. Mara nodded, trying to absorb his calm certainty. What if she asks the children about Robert, about why we left? Then they tell her the truth. He shouted. He was mean. He left without saying goodbye. They don't have to exaggerate or perform. They just have to be honest. He turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. Mara, listen to me. You've spent 2 months building a life here. The children are thriving. Anyone with eyes can see that. This guardian isn't coming to find fault. She's coming to verify what should be obvious. Let her. The 14 days passed in a blur of preparation that tried not to look like preparation. Caleb did fix the porch step and whitewash the chicken coop, but he also made sure to leave evidence of normal ranch work, tools in use, projects in progress, the everyday messiness of a working homestead. Mara deep cleaned the house, but left the children's drawings pinned to the kitchen wall, left Thomas's collection of interesting rocks on the windowsill, left Anna's embroidery project in the basket by the sofa. Miss Wright sent home glowing reports on all 3 children's progress, along with samples of their schoolwork. Doc Hayes stopped by on a social call and happened to mention he'd be happy to speak with anyone who had questions about the Whitfield children's excellent health. Reverend Thomas made a point of acknowledging the whole family during Sunday service, noting their regular attendance and participation in the community. The night before the guardian's visit, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed in the room off the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her, and tried to imagine tomorrow through Eleanor Ashford's eyes. Would she see a home, or just a place someone slept? Would she see a family, or just a collection of people living under one roof? Would she see a mother fighting for her children, or just a woman who'd made too many questionable choices? A soft knock on her door brought her upright. "Come in." Caleb entered, still dressed, a cup in his hand. "Figured you might not be sleeping. Brought you warm milk with honey. Ruth swears it helps." Mara accepted it gratefully. "You couldn't sleep either?" "Didn't try. Seemed dishonest to lie there pretending when we were both wound tighter than fence wire." He leaned against the doorframe. "Want to talk through it again?" "We've talked through it 17 times. 18 won't hurt." So they did. They went through the schedule for the next 2 days, the list of documents they'd prepared, the people Eleanor Ashford would likely want to interview, the questions she might ask. They reviewed appropriate responses, honest but clear, demonstrating stability without sounding rehearsed. "She'll want to see our sleeping arrangements," Mara said quietly. "She'll notice we don't share a room." "Let her notice. Plenty of married couples sleep separately for various reasons. Doesn't make the marriage less legal or the household less stable." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. "If she asks, we tell her the truth. We married for practical reasons, and we maintain separate quarters. That's nobody's business but ours. But we've got nothing to hide about it." "What if she thinks it's evidence the marriage is a sham?" "Then she'll have to reconcile that with the fact that we run this household together, make decisions together, present a unified front in raising your children. A marriage certificate doesn't require shared bedrooms to be valid." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You're borrowing trouble again. I can't help it. Everything feels like it's balanced on a knife's edge." "I know, but remember, the judge already saw through Robert's act. He's giving us this chance because he's inclined to believe you, not because he thinks you're unfit. The guardian's job is to confirm what he already suspects, that you're exactly the mother those children need." Mara wanted to believe him. She drank the warm milk and tried to let the sweetness settle her nerves. When Caleb finally left her to attempt sleep, she lay back down and forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each exhale like prayer. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. The guardian would see what she saw, and Mara would have to trust that the life she'd built was strong enough to withstand examination. Morning arrived with November cold and crystalline sunshine. Mara dressed carefully in her good dress, pinned her hair neatly, and made breakfast with hands that only trembled slightly. The children were unusually quiet, sensing the importance of the day, even though they didn't fully understand it. "Remember," Mara told them as they prepared for school, "a lady named Mrs. Ashford is coming to visit today and tomorrow. She's going to ask you some questions about living here. Just tell her the truth. Don't worry about saying the right thing. Just be honest." "What kind of questions?" Thomas asked, his face serious beyond his years. "About school, about your chores, about whether you're happy here, things like that." "That's easy," Anna said. "I am happy here. I'll just tell her that." If only it were that simple. Eleanor Ashford arrived at 2 o'clock precisely, driven out from town by the hotel proprietor in his buggy. She was a woman in her mid-50s with iron gray hair pulled into a neat bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. She wore a practical traveling suit and carried a leather satchel that likely contained forms, questionnaires, and official documentation. Mara met her on the porch, Caleb beside her, both of them presenting the picture of a united household. "Mrs. Ashford," Mara said, extending her hand. "Welcome. I'm Mara Rowe, and this is my husband, Caleb." Eleanor shook their hands with a firm grip, her gaze already cataloging details: the neat porch, the well-maintained house, the evidence of care and small touches like the swept walkway and polished door handle. "Thank you for receiving me. I understand this is an intrusive process, but I assure you it's necessary to make proper determination about the children's welfare." Her voice was professional, neither warm nor cold. "I'd like to begin with a tour of the home, if that's acceptable." "Of course. Please come in." Mara led her through the house, room by room, the kitchen with its clean surfaces and well-stocked shelves, the parlor with its comfortable furniture and evidence of family life, the basket of mending, the children's library books, the newspapers Caleb read in the evenings. Upstairs, the children's room with 2 beds neatly made, clothing hung on pegs, toys organized but accessible. Caleb's room, simple and masculine. Then back downstairs to Mara's small room off the kitchen. Eleanor noted everything in her ledger. Separate sleeping quarters for you and Mr. Rowe? Yes, Caleb said evenly. We maintain separate rooms. The marriage is legal and stable, but we prefer the arrangement. I see. Eleanor made a note, her expression revealing nothing. And the children sleep upstairs? The 3 older ones share the larger room, Mara explained. The baby sleeps with me. He's still nursing and wakes during the night. Understandable. More notes. I'd like to observe the children when they return from school. What time are they expected? 3:30, Caleb said. They walk home together. It's a mile from the schoolhouse. And you're comfortable with them walking that distance unsupervised? Thomas is responsible and the road is safe, Mara said. There are 3 other families along the route, so they're never truly isolated. But if weather is bad, Caleb or I drive the wagon to collect them. Eleanor nodded and continued her inspection. She examined the pantry, noting the stores of food. She checked the children's clothing, running fabric between her fingers to assess quality. She looked at the school books and slate boards, the toys, the small personal items that made the space theirs. When the children arrived home from school, their voices carrying through the yard before they even reached the door, Eleanor positioned herself to observe their entrance. Mara's heart clenched as she watched her children be assessed like specimens under glass. Thomas came in first, stopping short when he saw the stranger. His manners kicked in immediately. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon. You must be Thomas. Yes, ma'am. Thomas Whitfield. Actually, Mara said gently, we've filed for the children's surnames to be changed to Rowe. The paperwork is in progress. Eleanor made another note. I see. And these are your siblings? Anna and Joseph had crowded in behind Thomas, both staring at Eleanor with wide eyes. Anna performed a small curtsy she must have learned at school. Joseph hid partially behind his sister. I'm Anna, and this is Joseph, Anna said. Are you the lady Mama told us about? I am. My name is Mrs. Ashford. I'm here to make sure you're all healthy and happy. We are, Anna said simply. Would you like to see my drawings? I made one of the barn cats. Over the next hour, Eleanor interviewed each child separately in the parlor while Mara prepared supper in the kitchen, her ears straining to catch fragments of conversation. She heard Thomas's serious voice explaining his chores and schoolwork, Anna's animated description of learning to read, Joseph's shy responses to questions about playtime and favorite activities. She couldn't hear Eleanor's questions, couldn't know what the woman was writing in that ledger, couldn't control the narrative being constructed about her fitness as a mother. All she could do was keep cooking, keep moving, keep trusting that her children would show Eleanor the truth. Caleb came in from the evening chores as supper neared completion. He washed at the pump, dried his hands, and moved to Mara's side at the stove. How's it going? He murmured. I don't know. She's been talking to the children for over an hour. That's thorough, not suspicious. She's doing her job. I hate this. I hate that a stranger gets to decide if my children stay with me. I know. He rested his hand briefly on her shoulder. But we're going to get through it. Eleanor emerged from the parlor just as Mara was setting the table for supper. That smells wonderful. What are we having? Beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, apple pie for dessert. Mara kept her voice steady. You're welcome to join us for the meal. I'd like that very much. Observing family meals is part of the evaluation. So they ate under observation, passing bowls and plates while Eleanor watched how they interacted. She noted that Caleb helped Joseph cut his meat without being asked, that Anna and Thomas cleared their plates without prompting, that conversation flowed easily, ranging from school lessons to ranch work to plans for the upcoming weekend. She saw Samuel perched on Mara's lap, grabbing at spoons and babbling happily. She saw the easy rhythm of a household that functioned smoothly because everyone knew their role and performed it without constant supervision. After supper, Eleanor requested to speak with Caleb and Mara together. They sat in the parlor, the children playing quietly upstairs, and faced her across the small table where she'd spread her notes. I have some questions about the circumstances that brought you to Montana Territory, Mrs. Rowe. I've read the court documents, but I'd like to hear the situation in your own words. So Mara told her. She explained Robert's pattern of job loss, his increasing anger, his verbal cruelty toward the children. She described the morning he left, the note, the locked door. She walked through her desperate search for work in Bellwood, Caleb's offer, the decision to marry for legal protection when Robert threatened custody. Eleanor listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When Mara finished, she turned to Caleb. "And you, Mr. Rowe? Why did you involve yourself in this situation?" Caleb met her gaze steadily. "Because I needed help managing my household, and Mrs. Rowe needed work. It was a fair exchange that benefited both parties. The marriage formalized that arrangement and provided her with legal standing she wouldn't have had otherwise." "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air. Mara held her breath. "I respect her," Caleb said carefully. "I admire her strength and her dedication to her children. Do I love her the way romantic novels describe it? No. But I'm committed to this partnership and to the welfare of this family. That's worth more than flowery sentiment." Eleanor's pen scratched across paper. "And the children? What's your relationship with them?" "I'm not trying to replace their father. I'm just trying to be a steady adult presence in their lives. Someone they can rely on, who treats them with kindness and teaches them useful skills. Thomas helps me with ranch work. Anna shows me her schoolwork. Joseph follows me around asking questions. Samuel—" He paused, something soft crossing his face. "Samuel smiles when he sees me. That's enough." More notes. Then Eleanor looked at Mara. "The children speak very highly of you. Thomas says you're patient and fair. Anna says you read to them every night. Joseph says you make the best pancakes in the world and you never yell even when he spills things." Mara's throat tightened. "They also speak fondly of Mr. Rowe," Eleanor continued. "Thomas says he's teaching him to be a man. Anna says he fixed her doll and built her a shelf. Joseph says he's strong and kind." She set down her pen. "These are children who feel safe, valued, and loved. That's evident in every word they speak and every interaction I've observed." Hope flickered in Mara's chest, fragile and terrifying. "However," Eleanor said, and the hope wavered, "I do have concerns about the rushed nature of this marriage and whether it represents a stable long-term arrangement or simply a convenient legal fiction." "It's not fiction," Caleb said firmly. "It's legal, binding, and functional. We made vows before witnesses and we're honoring them. The fact that we maintain separate bedrooms doesn't invalidate the marriage or the household we've built together." "I'm not questioning the legality," Eleanor said. "I'm questioning the foundation. Marriages built on convenience rather than genuine partnership often fail, and the children would suffer from that instability." Mara found her voice. "Mrs. Ashford, I understand your concern, but I would argue that marriages built on practical foundations and mutual respect often outlast those built on nothing but passion. Caleb and I are partners. We work together, make decisions together, support each other's efforts. We may not have the romantic love people expect, but we have something more durable: shared purpose and genuine care for each other's welfare. That's a better foundation for raising children than fleeting emotion." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "That's a very mature perspective." "It's a perspective earned through experience. My first marriage started with love and ended in abandonment. This one started with honesty and has grown into genuine partnership. I know which one I trust more." The scratch of pen on paper seemed very loud in the quiet room. Eleanor stayed until the children's bedtime, observing the evening routine. She watched Mara help Joseph wash up and change into night clothes. She listened as Caleb read a story to all three older children, his voice gentle and engaging. She noted how Anna kissed both Mara and Caleb goodnight without hesitation, how Thomas said, "Good night, Ma, good night, Pa," as if the words were natural. How Joseph insisted on showing Caleb his drawing before bed and received genuine praise in return. When the children were finally settled, Eleanor gathered her things. "I'll return tomorrow morning to continue the evaluation. I'd like to observe the morning routine and speak with some community members. I've scheduled interviews with the school teacher, Dr. Hayes, and Reverend Thomas." "Of course," Mara said. "Whatever you need." After the hotel proprietor's buggy had carried Eleanor back to town, Mara sank into a chair at the kitchen table, exhausted beyond measure. Caleb poured them both coffee and sat across from her. "That could have gone worse," he offered. "It could have gone better." She saw healthy, happy children in a stable home. That's what matters. She also saw a marriage she thinks might be a convenient fiction. Then tomorrow we show her it's not. Caleb's voice was steady, certain. We show her a household that functions because we make it function. Partners who work together because we've chosen to. That's real, Mara. It might not look like what she expects, but it's real. Mara wanted to believe him. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and tried to find solid ground beneath her feet. Tomorrow would bring more observation, more questions, more judgment. But tonight her children were asleep upstairs, safe and warm. Tonight she had a partner sitting across from her who'd married her to help her keep them. Tonight she had a home that was hers by law and by effort. It would have to be enough. Because 60 days was running out and December 20th was coming whether she was ready or not. Morning came with frost on the windows and the kind of silence that made every sound seem amplified. Mara woke before dawn, dressed in the dark, and started breakfast with hands that had finally stopped shaking somewhere in the small hours of the night. She'd made peace with something during those sleepless hours. She couldn't control what Eleanor Ashford saw or thought or wrote in that ledger. All she could control was continuing to be exactly who she'd been for the past 3 months. A mother, a partner, a woman who'd built something worth keeping. Caleb came down as coffee finished brewing, his hair still damp from washing, his expression reflecting the same determined calm Mara was trying to cultivate. They moved around the kitchen in their established rhythm, him setting the table while she cooked, passing each other utensils and plates without needing to speak. It was the kind of comfortable efficiency that came from genuine partnership, and Mara hoped Eleanor would see it for what it was. The children woke to the smell of frying bacon and fresh biscuits. They came down one by one, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and settled into their usual places at the table. Thomas helped Joseph with his napkin. Anna poured milk for herself and her little brother without being asked. Samuel babbled from his high chair, banging a wooden spoon against the tray in enthusiastic rhythm. When Eleanor arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, she found them mid-breakfast, caught in the unguarded reality of family life. Joseph had spilled milk down his shirt. Anna was helping him clean it up while Mara cut more bacon. Thomas was telling Caleb about a problem he couldn't solve in his arithmetic homework. Samuel was covered in mashed biscuit and completely delighted with himself. Eleanor stood in the doorway, observing. After a moment, Mara noticed her and stood. "Mrs. Ashford, good morning. Would you like coffee?" "Please." Eleanor moved into the kitchen, her gaze taking in the organized chaos of a household in motion. "Don't let me interrupt your routine." So they didn't. Caleb helped Thomas work through the arithmetic problem, showing him how to break down the larger number into manageable pieces. Anna finished helping Joseph and returned to her own breakfast. Mara poured coffee for Eleanor and fresh milk for Samuel, wiped his face with a damp cloth, and sat back down to her own cooling meal. Normal life, being unvarnished and real. After breakfast, the children scattered to prepare for school. Eleanor watched Thomas help Joseph find his missing shoe, watched Anna pack all 3 lunch pails with practiced efficiency, watched Caleb check that everyone had their books and slates. When they were ready to leave, each child said goodbye, quick hugs for Mara, waves for Caleb, polite goodbyes for Eleanor. Then the house fell quiet, just the 3 adults and Samuel playing on his blanket in a patch of morning sun. "You've established a strong routine," Eleanor said, sipping her coffee. "The children clearly know their roles and responsibilities." "We believe children thrive with structure," Mara said carefully, "but also with flexibility. They have chores and expectations, but also time to play and explore." "I'd like to speak with your community references this morning," Eleanor said. "I've arranged to meet Miss Wright at the schoolhouse, then Dr. Hayes at his office, and Reverend Thomas at the church. This afternoon, I'd like to observe more of your daily activities, how you manage the household, interact with the baby, handle the ordinary tasks of life here." "Of course, whatever you need." Eleanor departed with the hotel proprietor who'd come to fetch her, leaving Mara and Caleb in the sudden silence of the empty house. Mara felt the weight of those interviews happening without her, people she'd come to trust now being asked to vouch for her fitness as a mother. "They'll speak well of you," Caleb said, reading her thoughts as he so often did, "because there's nothing but good to speak." What if it's not enough? Then it's not enough, and we deal with whatever comes next. But standing here worrying won't change what they say or what Eleanor decides. He moved toward the door. I've got work in the north pasture. You've got your usual routine. We keep living our lives like we have been, because that's what she needs to see. That this isn't a performance. It's just who we are. He was right. So Mara threw herself into the familiar tasks that had become her days. She stripped beds and washed linens in the big copper tub, hanging them to dry in the cold November air. She scrubbed floors and kneaded bread dough, the physical labor helping to quiet her anxious mind. She played with Samuel, helping him practice crawling, singing him songs her own mother had sung to her before the fever took her 20 years ago. When Eleanor returned just after noon, she found Mara in the kitchen with flour on her apron and Samuel napping in his cradle near the warm stove. The house smelled like yeast and lemon soap and the beef roast Mara had started for supper. Miss Wright speaks very highly of your children, Eleanor said without preamble. She says Thomas has a natural aptitude for mathematics and shows leadership among his peers. Anna is reading at a level 2 years above her age and has a gift for storytelling. Joseph is young yet, but he's curious, well-behaved, and already showing strong pre-literacy skills. She set her satchel on the table. Dr. Hayes confirms all 4 children are in excellent health, proper weight, no signs of malnutrition or neglect, age-appropriate development. He mentioned that you've brought them in promptly for any concerns and follow his guidance carefully. Mara's hands stilled in the bread dough. That's good to hear. Reverend Thomas was equally complimentary. He says your family attends services regularly, participates in community events, and that you've integrated well into the social fabric of Bellwood, despite being relative newcomers. Eleanor pulled out her ledger. I also spoke with Mrs. Crane at the general store and Mr. Patterson, the blacksmith. Both commented on the children's good manners and your careful management of household resources. I try to teach them responsibility, Mara said quietly, and to live within our means. It shows. Eleanor watched as Mara shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise. You're a capable woman, Mrs. Rowe. That's evident in everything I've observed. The children are well cared for, the household is properly managed, and you've established stability in a remarkably short time. Hope fluttered in Mara's chest, fragile as moth wings. However, Eleanor continued, and there it was, the word that preceded every blow. I remain concerned about the foundation of your marriage to Mr. Rowe. Not because I doubt its legality or even its current functionality, but because I question its long-term viability. What happens when one of you develops feelings for someone else? What happens if this arrangement of convenience becomes inconvenient? The children would suffer through another upheaval, another loss of stability. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and met Eleanor's gaze directly. With respect, Mrs. Ashford, I think you're making assumptions about our marriage based on conventional expectations. Yes, Caleb and I married quickly. Yes, we maintained separate quarters. But we made vows to each other, and we're honoring them. We work together every single day. We make decisions jointly about the children, the household, the ranch. We support each other's efforts and respect each other's autonomy. She paused, gathering her thoughts. You want to know about long-term viability? I'll tell you what I've learned. Marriages built on passion alone often crumble when that passion fades. But partnerships built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine care tend to endure because they're rooted in something more substantial than feeling. Caleb and I may not have romantic love, but we have something I value more: trust. I trust him with my children's welfare. I trust him to keep his word. I trust him to be present and steady even when things are difficult. That's not convenience, that's commitment. Eleanor made notes, her expression thoughtful. And if Mr. Rowe were to meet someone he wanted to marry for love? Then we'd handle it honestly, like adults. But that's a hypothetical future problem, not a current reality. Right now, today, we have a functioning household where 4 children are thriving. Isn't that what matters? Not whether our marriage looks conventional, but whether it works? Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of the wagon rolling into the yard drew their attention. Caleb came in carrying a burlap sack, his face windburned from the cold. Mrs. Ashford, he greeted, setting the sack by the door. I hope the interviews went well. They were illuminating, thank you. Eleanor studied him with sharp attention. Mrs. Rowe and I were just discussing the nature of your marriage. Were you? Caleb poured himself coffee, unhurried. And what conclusions have you reached? I've expressed concern about long-term stability given the unconventional foundation. Unconventional doesn't mean unstable. Caleb leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to be blunt with you. I married Mara because she needed legal protection, and I needed help running this ranch. That's the truth. But what's also true is that in the 3 months since she arrived, this house has become a home again. Those children have brought life back to a place that felt empty after my wife died. And Mara herself. He glanced at her, something warm in his expression. She's proven herself to be exactly the kind of partner I didn't know I needed. Someone strong, capable, who doesn't quit when things get hard. He set down his cup. You want guarantees about the future? I can't give you those. Nobody can. But I can tell you that I made vows, and I keep my word. I promised to provide a stable home for those children, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Whether that satisfies your definition of a proper marriage is frankly irrelevant to me. What matters is whether those children are safe, healthy, and happy, and I think you've seen enough to know they are. Eleanor's pen moved across the page. When she looked up, her expression had shifted slightly. Still professional, but with a hint of something that might have been respect. Mr. Rowe, would you object to my speaking with you and Mrs. Rowe together about the specific dynamics of your household management? I'd like to understand how you make decisions, handle conflicts, and coordinate responsibilities. Not at all. So they sat at the kitchen table, Samuel babbling contentedly in Mara's lap, and walked Eleanor through the practical reality of their partnership. Caleb explained how they'd divided household and ranch duties, how they consulted each other on major decisions, how they'd established rules and routines for the children. Mara described their weekly planning sessions where they discussed upcoming needs and challenges, their shared commitment to the children's education and well-being, the way they'd learned to read each other's signals and provide support without needing to ask. It wasn't romantic, it was operational. But the care underneath the practicality was evident in every example they gave. When the children returned from school, Eleanor observed them through the afternoon and evening routine. She watched Thomas complete his homework at the kitchen table while Mara prepared supper, Caleb helping him when he got stuck. She saw Anna teaching Joseph his letters using a slate and chalk, patient and encouraging. She noted how the children naturally included both Mara and Caleb in their activities, showing Mara a drawing, asking Caleb to help build something, seeking comfort from either adult without hesitation. At supper, Eleanor asked the children direct questions. Thomas, do you feel safe here? Yes, ma'am. Safer than I ever felt before. Anna, are you happy? Very happy. I have my own shelf for my drawings and Mama reads to us every night and Pa... She stopped, glanced at Caleb. Mr. Rowe fixed my doll and taught me to whistle. I like it here. Joseph, what's your favorite thing about living on the ranch? The kittens and the rope swing, and that nobody yells anymore. That last statement hung in the air. Eleanor made a note. After the children were in bed, Eleanor conducted her final interview with Mara and Caleb together. She asked about their plans for the future, about how they'd handle challenges that might arise, about their understanding of parental responsibility and child welfare. She asked difficult questions about discipline, education, religious instruction, preparation for the children's eventual independence. Mara and Caleb answered with the same steady honesty they'd maintained throughout. They didn't pretend to have all the answers. They acknowledged that raising children was complex and they were learning as they went. But they were clear about their commitment and their priorities. Finally, as the evening grew late, Eleanor closed her ledger. I'll be submitting my report to Judge Bradford within the week. It will include my observations, interview summaries, and my professional assessment of this household's suitability for the children's continued residence. And your assessment is? Mara couldn't help asking. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. My assessment is that these children are fortunate to be in your care, Mrs. Rowe. They're healthy, well-adjusted, properly educated, and clearly loved. Your marriage to Mr. Rowe may not be conventional, but it's functional and stable. This household operates with clear routines, appropriate structure, and genuine care for the children's well-being. The relief that flooded through Mara was so intense it made her dizzy. However, Eleanor continued, I will note in my report that continued monitoring may be advisable to ensure long-term stability, The final decision rests with Judge Bradford. It wasn't complete victory, but it wasn't defeat either. After Eleanor departed for the final time, Mara stood on the porch and watched the buggy lights disappear into the darkness. Caleb came out and stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "We did all we could," he said quietly. "I know. Now we wait." The waiting was its own kind of torture, days stretched into weeks, November cold deepening toward winter. Mara threw herself into preparations for the upcoming holiday season, making the house festive for the children even as anxiety gnawed at her constantly. She baked and decorated, sewed new clothes for the children who were growing faster than she could keep up with, helped Thomas with increasingly complex schoolwork. Caleb worked longer hours as winter work demanded, preparing the ranch for the cold months ahead. But he always came in for supper, always spent time with the children before bed, always offered Mara quiet support in the form of steady presence and occasional gentle humor. They'd become something unexpected in those months. Not quite what they'd started as, but not quite what conventional marriage looked like either. Something uniquely theirs, built on honesty and necessity that had transformed into genuine partnership. The letter from Martin arrived on December 15th, 5 days before the scheduled hearing. Mara's hands shook as she opened it. Eleanor Ashford's report had been filed. Martin had obtained a copy. His letter summarized the key findings: children healthy and well-adjusted, household stable and properly managed, educational needs being met, emotional welfare clearly prioritized. Eleanor had recommended that custody remain with Mara, with the caveat that a follow-up evaluation be conducted in 6 months to ensure continued stability. It was the best outcome they could have hoped for. But the final decision still rested with Judge Bradford, and the hearing was still scheduled for December 20th. They made the trip to Bismarck again, this time with more confidence but no less tension. The courtroom was the same, the wooden benches just as hard, the judge's bench just as imposing. Robert sat with his lawyer, looking less smug than he had in October. Perhaps he'd heard about Eleanor's report. Perhaps he'd realized his case was weaker than he'd thought. Judge Bradford entered, settled behind his bench, and reviewed the documents before him with careful attention. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of his pen and the occasional cough from the gallery. Finally, he looked up. "I've reviewed the guardian ad litem's report, the testimony from the previous hearing, and the additional documentation submitted by both parties. This court's primary concern is the welfare of the 4 minor children. All other considerations are secondary to that fundamental priority." Mara held her breath. Mrs. Ashford's report is thorough and persuasive. She found the children to be healthy, well-adjusted, properly educated, and clearly thriving in Mrs. Rowe's care. She documented a stable household with appropriate routines, adequate resources, and genuine care for the children's physical and emotional needs. He paused. She also noted that Mrs. Rowe's marriage to Mr. Caleb Rowe, while unconventional in some respects, provides legal and practical stability that serves the children's best interests. He turned to Robert. "Mr. Whitfield, the evidence suggests that you abandoned your family in August of this year. You made no attempt to provide financial support, maintained no contact with your children, and only sought custody after Mrs. Rowe had established a stable new household. Your claim of parental concern is undermined by your actions, or lack thereof, during the critical months when your children needed support." Robert's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Judge Bradford looked at Mara. "Mrs. Rowe, this court recognizes that you left a difficult situation and made choices designed to protect your children's welfare. You've demonstrated capability, stability, and commitment to your children's needs. The evidence shows that they're thriving under your care." He picked up his gavel. "Therefore, this court awards full custody of Thomas, Anna, Joseph, and Samuel to their mother, Mrs. Mara Rowe. Mr. Whitfield's petition for custody is denied. Mr. Whitfield is ordered to pay child support in the amount of $15 per month, payable through the territorial court. He is granted supervised visitation rights should he choose to exercise them, with arrangements to be made through proper legal channels." The gavel came down with finality. "This hearing is concluded." Mara sat frozen, the words washing over her like a wave. Full custody. The children were hers. Robert couldn't take them. The battle was over, and she'd won. Caleb's hand found hers under the table, squeezed hard. Martin was already gathering documents, his expression professionally pleased. Robert stood abruptly and left the courtroom without a word, his lawyer trailing behind him. Outside, in the cold December air, Mara finally let herself breathe. Douglas was waiting with the children at the hotel, and they walked the 3 blocks in silence, each processing the enormity of what had just happened. When the children saw them, Thomas read the answer on their faces. "We're staying?" "You're staying," Mara confirmed, her voice breaking. "Forever. You're mine, and nobody can take you away." The embrace that followed involved all 6 of them, 4 children, Mara, and Caleb, who'd somehow become part of this family he'd never planned to have. Anna was crying. Joseph was laughing. Thomas held on to Mara like he'd never let go. Samuel babbled happily, sensing the joy even if he didn't understand it. "Well," Douglas said gruffly, wiping his own eyes, "I guess this calls for celebration. Who wants pie?" The train ride home was different from every other trip they'd made. This time they were going home not as temporary residents or uncertain refugees, but as a family with legal standing and permanent residence. The children chattered excitedly about Christmas plans and school projects and 100 other ordinary things that felt extraordinary in light of what they'd just won. Mara leaned against Caleb's shoulder, exhausted and relieved and grateful beyond measure. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate for everything he'd done. "You already thanked me, about 100 times. And I'll probably thank you 100 more before I'm done." He smiled slightly. "I suppose I can live with that." The ranch welcomed them back with cold stars and warm lamplight. Ruth had been watching the place, and she had stew waiting and the fire built up and congratulations that came with fierce hugs and happy tears. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Mara sat at the kitchen table with tea and tried to process everything that had happened. 6 months ago, she'd been walking away from a train station with nothing but desperation and determination. Now she had a home, a legal marriage, full custody of her children, and a future that felt secure for the first time in years. Caleb came downstairs and poured himself coffee, even though it was late and they'd both been surviving on too little sleep for too long. "Can't rest?" he asked. "Too much going through my head." Mara looked at him across the table, this man who'd married her for practical reasons and had somehow become essential to everything she'd built. "I keep thinking about that day on the road, when you stopped and asked what I could do." "Best decision I ever made," Caleb said simply. "You changed everything for us. You know that, don't you? We changed things for each other. I got a home that feels alive again, children who make me laugh, a partner who makes me want to be better than I am." He set down his cup. "That's not charity. That's just good fortune that we happen to need exactly what the other could provide." Mara considered this. Somewhere in the past months, gratitude had transformed into something deeper. Not romantic love exactly, but genuine affection rooted in respect and shared experience. She valued Caleb's steady presence, his quiet humor, his willingness to stand beside her through legal battles and daily struggles alike. She trusted him with her children and her future in ways she'd never trusted anyone. Whether that was love or something else entirely, she couldn't quite name. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Caleb said. "We raise these children. We run this ranch. We figure things out as we go, same as we've been doing." "And the marriage?" He met her eyes. "What about it?" Eleanor's report recommended a follow-up evaluation in 6 months to make sure we're maintaining stability. "Then we'll maintain stability. We're good at that." He paused. "Unless you're asking something else." Mara wasn't entirely sure what she was asking. "I suppose I'm wondering if this arrangement still makes sense to you. Now that the legal crisis is resolved, you're not obligated to—" "Stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "I didn't marry you just to win a custody battle. I married you because it made sense then, and it still makes sense now. This household functions because we make it function together. Those children need stability, and we provide it. Nothing about that changes just because a judge signed some papers." "But what if you want more? What if you meet someone?" "Mara." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I made vows. I keep my word. Whatever this marriage is or isn't, whatever it might become, we'll figure it out together. But I'm not walking away just because the immediate crisis has passed. That's not who I am. The warmth of his hand on hers felt like promise and comfort in equal measure. Mara turned her palm up, lacing her fingers through his. "Then I suppose we're in this together," she said softly. "I suppose we are." Winter settled over the ranch with quiet inevitability. Snow came in late December, transforming the landscape into something pristine and new. Mara hung evergreen boughs in the windows and baked cookies with the children, determined to give them the Christmas they deserved after everything they'd endured. On Christmas morning, there were small gifts: carved toys Douglas had made, a new slate for Anna, books for Thomas, a stuffed rabbit Ruth had sewn for Joseph. Samuel received a teething ring and seemed more interested in the wrapping paper than anything else. Caleb had carved Mara a recipe box, smooth pine with her initials burned into the lid. She'd sewn him new work shirts, practical but well made. They exchanged these gifts with the quiet pleasure of people who understood that thoughtfulness mattered more than extravagance. The children played in the snow, built forts and had snowball fights, came inside red-cheeked and laughing. The house filled with the sounds of ordinary joy, children's voices, the crackle of the fire, the comfortable rhythm of family life. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Mara and Caleb sat by the fire with coffee and companionable silence. Outside, snow continued to fall, gentle and persistent. "This is good," Mara said softly. "This life we've built. It's good." "It is," Caleb agreed. "Better than I expected." "Better than I hoped for," Mara admitted. 6 months ago, I would have settled for basic survival. Instead, I got... She gestured around the warm room at the evidence of home and family. "This, all of this," Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I think maybe we got each other," and everything else followed from that. It was the most romantic thing he'd ever said to her, and it mattered more because it was true. The months that followed brought their own rhythm. Winter gave way to early spring. The children grew and thrived. Thomas shooting up so fast Mara could barely keep him in trousers. Anna reading everything she could get her hands on. Joseph starting school with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. Samuel learned to walk, taking his first wobbling steps straight into Caleb's waiting arms. The follow-up evaluation came in late March, a different guardian this time, but with similar observations. Healthy children, stable household, clear evidence of proper care. The recommendation was to close the case. No further monitoring needed. Robert never sent the required child support. He never requested visitation. As far as Mara could tell, he'd simply disappeared back into whatever life he'd built without them. She felt nothing about this except relief that he'd chosen absence over interference. Martin filed the final divorce papers in April. By May, Mara was no longer Mara Whitfield at all. She was Mara Rowe completely, legally, permanently. The children's surname changes were finalized. On paper and in practice, they were a family. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Caleb said, "I've been thinking." About? About the sleeping arrangements. Mara's heart did something complicated. "Oh?" "Not what you're thinking," he said quickly. "Just, the room off the kitchen is small, and Samuel's getting bigger. You're going to need more space eventually. There's a room upstairs next to the children's. Used to be a sewing room when my mother was alive. We could convert it, give you proper space of your own." It was practical, thoughtful, exactly the kind of thing Caleb would think of. But underneath the practicality, Mara heard the question he wasn't quite asking. Was she planning to stay in that small room forever? Or was there room in this marriage for something more? "That's generous," she said carefully. "But I'm comfortable where I am." "Are you? Or are you just used to it?" Mara considered this. The truth was complicated. She was comfortable in the small room because it felt safe, contained, hers. But she was also beginning to wonder if she was staying there out of habit rather than preference, if the boundaries they'd established were still serving them or just limiting them. "I don't know," she admitted. "What are you really asking me, Caleb?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching the children's silhouettes moving through the twilight. "I'm asking if you want to stay in a marriage of convenience, or if you're open to this becoming something more, something real." It already is real. You know what I mean." She did. He was asking if the partnership they'd built could transform into something deeper, if the respect and trust they'd developed could become the foundation for actual love. Mara's heart was racing. What do you want? I want whatever you're comfortable with. If you're happy with things as they are, we'll leave them be. But if you're open to... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I've come to care for you, Mara, not just as a business partner or housekeeper or even as the mother of the children I've grown to love, as you. And if there's any chance you might feel the same, I'd like to know. It was the most vulnerable she'd ever heard him. This man who'd married her for practical reasons was now asking if convenience could become choice. Mara reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his the way she had that night after the custody hearing. I do feel the same. I didn't expect to, but I do. You've become... She struggled to find words adequate to the feeling. Essential. Not just because you provide security or stability, but because you're kind and steady and good. Because you make me laugh. Because you fixed Anna's doll without being asked, and you teach Thomas to work with tools, and you hold Samuel when I'm busy and never complain. She paused, gathering courage. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a marriage of convenience and became just a marriage. Real and complicated and imperfect. But ours. Caleb turned toward her, his free hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. So we're doing this? Actually doing this? We've been doing it all along. We just didn't call it what it was. He leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful and full of promise. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd exchanged brief pecks on special occasions, quick touches that fulfilled social expectation. But this was different. This was choice, not obligation. This was two people who'd built something real deciding to acknowledge it honestly. When they pulled apart, both a little breathless, Caleb smiled. So about that room upstairs? Mara laughed, one step at a time. Fair enough. He settled back, arm around her shoulders now, her head resting against his chest. They sat that way as darkness fell completely and the children finally came inside as stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky. The years that followed weren't without challenge. Ranching was hard work, raising 4 children harder still. There were droughts and difficult winters, illness and injury, the ordinary struggles of life that tested them repeatedly. But they faced everything together, Mara and Caleb, building on the foundation they'd established through necessity until it became something unshakable. Thomas grew into a young man who managed the ranch alongside Caleb, taking over more responsibility each year until the day Caleb signed half the property over to him, making him a legal partner in the operation. Anna became a teacher, opening a small school in town where she taught other children to love reading the way she did. Joseph discovered a talent for working with horses and eventually started a breeding program that made the Rowe Ranch known throughout the territory. Samuel, who'd been too young to remember the desperate walk away from a train station or the custody battle that nearly tore their family apart, grew up knowing only love and security. He became a lawyer, inspired by Martin Beck's example, and spent his career helping families navigate the legal complexities that had once threatened his own. They had 2 more children, a daughter born 2 years after the custody hearing, named Eleanor after the guardian whose report had saved them, and a son 3 years after that. These children grew up in a house where love had been earned through hard work and deliberate choice, where partnership meant something concrete and daily. Mara never forgot the woman she'd been at the train station, the one who'd walked away with $17 and 4 children and no idea how she'd survive. That woman lived inside her always, a reminder of how far determination could carry someone when combined with a little luck and the kindness of strangers who became family. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb gave her a locket. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of the children clustered together, the other of the ranch house with its deep porch and welcoming windows. On the back, he'd had engraved, "We built this together." It was more accurate than any romantic declaration could have been. They had built it together, a home, a family, a life that neither of them could have created alone. Built it from desperation and necessity, from practical choices and honest partnership, from respect that became affection, that became love so gradually they couldn't pinpoint exactly when the transformation occurred. Years later, when people asked Mara about her marriage, she never knew quite how to explain it. How could she describe starting with nothing but survival and ending with everything that mattered? How could she convey that the best love she'd ever known had begun with a simple question on a dusty road: what can you do? She'd answered honestly then: cook, clean, mend, work without complaint. She'd offered her capabilities and her desperation in equal measure. What she hadn't known was that Caleb's real question was deeper than that. He'd been asking what she could become, given the chance, what they could build together, given opportunity and time. The answer turned out to be everything. They could build everything, and so they had. Mara's old suitcase sat in the attic now, forgotten except when someone needed it for travel. She'd stopped checking to make sure it was still there, stopped keeping it packed and ready like an escape hatch. She didn't need an escape anymore. She had a home that was hers by effort and by love, not just by law. She had children who called two people mama and pa and meant it with their whole hearts. She had a partnership that had transformed into a marriage that had transformed into something neither of them had words for, but both of them recognized as essential. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were playing in the yard, Mara and Caleb would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the fields they had planted together. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Sometimes Caleb would reach for her hand and Mara would lace her fingers through his, the gesture as natural now as breathing. She'd been asked once what she could do, and she'd answered with a list of skills and capabilities. But the real answer, the one she'd discovered in the years since that desperate August day, was simpler and more profound. She could survive. She could fight for what mattered. She could build a life from nothing but determination and honest work. She could love and be loved in return, not because of perfection, but because of persistence. She could do whatever was necessary to keep her children safe and give them the life they deserved. And in the end, that had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.